Okay, after 4 months, welcome back to NERx. NERx is a production of the NMRA Northeastern Region and the National Model Railroad Association. Before we start, I have to mention that John Doring was supposed to host this afternoon, but he is not feeling well the last couple days and needs his rest. I am Chuck Diljak of the Garden State Division and will be your substitute bow tie wearing host for this afternoon's program. Over the next 2 fun-filled days, we will present clinics, layout tours, model showcases, and roundtable discussions. The team at NERx would like to thank Mini Prints for sponsoring this convention. Mini Prints fills a niche in the hobby, 3D printing animals, figures, and oddities that are not commercially available anywhere else. Mini Prints will be holding a drawing for a $50 gift voucher that will end on Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern, with the drawing taking place at 7 p.m. To enter, just open another window on your browser and go to facebook.com/miniprints3D. Look for a post related to NERx and enter a comment with your era and the hashtag MiniPrints3D. That is all you have to do to enter the drawing. Good luck. In addition to entering in the Mini Prints drawing, I encourage you to share comments and questions using the chat feature in either YouTube or Facebook as you watch and listen to our clinics and tours this weekend. We will do our best to get the questions to the presenter at the end of each session. Now sit back, relax, and let's have some fun with this great hobby of model railroading. Our first stop out of the station is a panel discussion on layout command control, led by a member of the Hub Division who has been in the NMRA since 2009. He's active on the NMRA DCC Working Group and serves on the Conformance and Inspection Committee, updating the DCC Command Station Conformance Test Program. His lifelong love of electronics and a career in electrical engineering are a natural fit for the more technical side of the hobby, but he's willing to trade his technical skills to learn a few more things like scratch building, track work, and scenery. He publishes a regular column in the Hub's Headlight newsletter on model railroad electronics topics and has presented at the NMRA National Convention since 2018. And if you see him at a train show, he's just Brenna's dad. Please welcome the Layout Command Control panel with Eric Whitney and 2 more guests he will introduce. Go ahead,
Thank
Eric.
you very much. Thank you very much, Chuck. It's great to be here and welcome everyone online. Hope you guys are taking a little bit of a break in all this heavy sun we were enjoying. So with me on this panel today, we have Dave Inslee and Jeff Garreau, both of the Hub Division. These folks, I think, are what I consider very excellent sources for help with LCC because they're not technical engineers like myself. And they have the love of the hobby and they want to get stuff done on the railroad. So I asked them to join me on this panel because I think getting their perspective is incredibly important for today's chat. With that, I think, Jeff, do you want to put up our intro and then we'll go
Well, I think
there?
they're running it. Our speed was supposed to run it.
Oh, okay.
I hope it.
A lot of us started out with, and some still have plenty of fun, with just DC power.
Month or so pulling in questions. I was hoping people would come in and email their questions ahead of time. Also, we have the chat feature open, so if you have a question and want to ask during the event, please by all means use the chat window and do that. It's the meat of this clinic really is about talking about LCC from a modeler's perspective, not from a technology perspective. And that's, I think, something I want to make sure we say right up front, because yes, there are technical concerns, challenges, and education that has to happen. But I think it's important to understand that LCC is yet another tool like DCC for our model railroads. And I think one of the things that's been kind of missing from my perspective is how do you apply LCC to the layout and what it's good for, how does it work, and all that stuff. Jeff, Dave, do you guys want to say anything introductory wise before we head into questions?
Are we going to see the video?
I think it's running now in the background.
I looked online and I didn't see it.
Oh.
After you set up your system using JMRI.
Oh, now it's on. Okay.
You can disconnect the computer and it all just works. And
I'm not sure how much of what we said is going to come
There
through.
are a few parts that you
Jerry
will need
says
to
that we're
get
speaking
started.
over the video, so I
As
don't
an
know how,
example,
I
here's
can't
the
really see
beginning
that,
of
so I'm not
Jerry
really sure.
McDonald's LCC network. Power and PC USB connection adjacent to the DCC system, and the first nodes used to control staging turnouts. We're using the RR circuit system as it's really the only commercial system available today, but there are a lot of experimenters pushing the edges of that envelope, and perhaps some new soon-to-be manufacturers. The good news is the connections between nodes are standard Cat5 cables that are available at Home Depot and Lowe's, and are pretty easy to make too. So here's what you will need to get started with LCC. Your network will need power. Here's the RR Circuit's LCC power point. And to connect your PC to the LCC network, here's the LCC buffer USB. And then there are the nodes. They allow connection to the layout for producers like buttons and occupancy detectors, as well as for consumers like Tortoise switch machines and switch towers. This is an RR Circuit's Tower LCC, which allows 16 such connections. There are also other types of nodes available, as well as several boards that process the signals to and from the node. For example, to allow tortoises to be controlled or occupancy to be detected. Finally, the network must be terminated correctly at each end, so one of these at each end of the network. Fortunately, RR Circuits has assembled a starter kit available directly from them with an NMRA discount, as well as from distributors like Tony's Train Exchange. So here is Jerry's LCC system actually switching a tortoise so an engine can leave the yard. A little train action to get this panel started.
All right, so Dave and Jeff, you want to give her a little intro with before we dive into questions?
Sorry. As you saw a little bit of in the video, a little more than a year ago, I started working with a friend's layout to put remote control for the switches and ultimately to be able to have dispatcher control. And I looked through all the various options for control and determined that LCC was at the very least monetarily commensurate with everything else. And it had a lot more capability. So it was like, well, there's sort of a no-brainer to go that way. So then I had to figure out how to do it, which took quite a while because there wasn't, and there still isn't all that much really good information all in one spot. There was a really nice series in the NMRA magazine a couple years ago that if you collect up all of those stories, you end up with a pretty good background. And I was happy to be able to get them. And I was able to get switches working. And now I'm confronting signaling, which I've discovered involves speed rather than routing, which I had no idea about. So I have a lot to learn about signaling itself before I can think about making LCC make it happen. So that's where I'm at.
You know, I have a similar story because I've started building a layout in my basement. And since I was just starting, I decided it was a great time to try LCC. And I came to that conclusion after reading an article in RMC that talked about really building an interlock. And so it seemed pretty simple and straightforward. So I bought a bunch of stuff from RR Circuits at Springfield one year and left it in a drawer for about another year until I needed to get my last requirement for my electrical AP certificate. And so that was to control turnouts from a panel. And then I realized I don't really need to build a panel because I could use a panel in Panel Pro from JMRI, hook up 4 turnouts, and I thought this has got to be simple, right? So off I went. I read a lot, got more confused than I ever have been in my entire life. And then I finally decided to stop reading and just do it. And it turned out to be pretty straightforward once we really got over the hump of all the electrical jargon and et cetera. So that was my start.
So Jeff and Dave have, well, Jeff has a layout, Dave's building a layout, and I'm planning a layout. So we're at different stages of our railroad lives. I've gotten involved with LCC through my article work and through my work on the hub division signaling for the modular group, and playing around with some ideas about signaling there. And I set up a little test case, and I took the starter kit that Dick sells, and I started building out a little test setup to figure it out. And Jeff has helped me write an article on this. It's in the headlight, actually two-part article on getting just the basics working. And my intention is to keep going and bring the signaling part of that to life. Now, I will say one of the things that even as a technical person, I struggled with was just trying to understand kind of where to start. There's so many things going on. You got the JMRI side for programming, you got the hardware and the LCC itself. And one of the things that I came to realization was when I started looking into how the RR circuits boards work, I didn't quite understand, and this is going to sound really stupid, the name of the company is Railroad Circuits. Dick designs not just hobby things, but actual modeling railroad circuits. And so if you understand that what he's actually doing is modeling a railroad circuit, then you got a big leg up. So I realized that one of the things I have to learn is to understand signaling from a railroad perspective, not from a hobby or an outside perspective, but actually look at what the railroads actually did and find out that, oh, in fact, Dick is actually recreating railroad circuits inside his LCC devices, and that's what you have to kind of learn. So that's a perspective I think might be helpful for people to understand when you're looking into this. And Dave, nodded to this as well. So I think that's my opening comment.
That's a really great point, because I've been following the Layout Command Control Group's IO list, and I understand about half of what I read, and I realized pretty quickly it's really because all of that technical railroad jargon as much as the electronics jargon, right? So you have these two different competing pieces you have to fully understand. And so there was a reference to Dr. Chubb's book on signaling that really became a great reference and highly recommended by a lot of people, at least on that thread. So it's, again, another hobby within the hobby for all of us to explore.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of interesting to me because I get to learn about stuff that I've never actually seen work in real life. So it's kind of fun. One of the first questions that we got through the email ahead of time for this panel was actually addressing this exact problem. And the quote there was, the author's perspective was that that perhaps LCC is not ready for prime time, and I think that's I think that's a complete view of where it's at. It is a stage in the LCC development where a lot of technical work has gone on, a lot of development at the specification level, and getting the initial version implemented. With right now, there's RR Circuits has a family of products that you can buy and use in your layout, but there's more manufacturers coming online. It's in its infancy in that regard, but I think as we get more manufacturers contributing products, then the information will start to become a little bit maybe easier to get a hold of. But yes, it is, I think, right now at a point where you have to do a little bit of work on your own to go and find answers. That's not a great story, but it's the story, and I think that's the story we've seen in the hobby when we bring new technology on board. There is no one master educator, if you will. It's kind of a group effort. And I think one of the things I love about the NMRA is that you can find people and friends that have a different background and maybe can help you out. And that's probably a really good way to tackle this problem is, link up with some friends and hopefully some of the stuff that we're doing, in the NMRA with our local newsletter and clinics and stuff like that, we can actually help get some of this information out so people can actually use it. The other thing I'll say, and Dave brought this up, but go online. I mean, there are user groups out there, LCC, JMRI. These folks have really good I mean, developers are on those lists. You'll actually get developers answering questions, and so as well as other users. So that's a really good resource. And if you aren't using that, you're probably at a disadvantage, I would say. So,
yeah, and I'll echo those sentiments of that, that first question, let's call it, that we got, because I felt the same way. I was reading a lot. I was getting so totally confused about really what was what. But when it boils down to it, I really just essentially took a tower LCC board. I plugged in an FSMD8, which is a stall motor drive, which I hooked up to my tortoises. And it was just as simple as wiring them and plugging things in, because these boards kind of recognize themselves on the network and announce themselves. So once you go into JMRI, it recognizes that board is on your network. You just look at the quote unquote lines. And so as soon as you figure out the jargon used, it becomes relatively straightforward. But it's really just getting over that hump. And I found the best way to do it is to dive in and go. So literally I spent an afternoon, I hooked up this, SMD8. I ran the ribbon cables directly to my stall motors, and I just, pulled these little wires apart. I put some connectors on my stall motors so I could wire them easily. And then literally when I turned the system on, all of a sudden the tortoises started to work. So I was like, woohoo! Fairly straightforward. So dive in.
Absolutely. One of the points that Jeff made in the opening was, we have LCC is meant to stand alongside DCC, and essentially it's a way of offloading DCC from doing things other than running trains. And one of the reasons that's important is a technical reason, and that is that with large layouts, DCC is very busy running trains and doesn't have a lot of extra space to manage signals, for example. So even though you can do things in DCC now, and there have been products that came out to do control over DCC because there wasn't it was an alternative there. There were systems like CMRI, Bruce Chubb's system. It just uses a different way of communicating, but essentially the idea is to get the load off of your DCC system so that it can just focus on controlling locomotives. And I think that's an important thing to understand. There's technical reasons for why you want to do that. You don't have to understand those if you don't want to, but that's the gist of why it's there. We got another question that kind of relates to this, and that is, if you have a system that already has DCC control over things like turnouts, then do you have to switch to LCC? And the answer is no, you don't have to. Why would you want to? Maybe a question. And that is, for long-term, I think scalability and performance. But I don't think LCC is going to impose any kind of, if what you have works, let it work. And if what you want to do runs out of steam, then eventually you may want to consider converting over to LCC. How that's done, I don't know of any direct, easy ways of doing that. I don't know if there's any plans to make devices that will translate DCC into LCC and that kind of thing. I will say that from an investment point of view, that's a decision you have to make long term. So I don't think there's any easy answer there. But it is the nice thing about LCC is that it's a good once you kind of get the infrastructure running, it's a good way to add to your layout because it scales very easily. You're literally just plugging network cables in from one device to the next. It's very easy to wire. You don't have the spaghetti of wiring under your layout that you might have with an older system with lots of I/O cards and bits and bytes and wires running around. So I think that from a layout point of view, if you're building a layout, this is really a nice way to make a neat wiring package, control the information, and do a really nice job. Plus, the capabilities are just astounding. I mean, the idea that you can install the LCC in your layout and you can have it actually work without a computer required to do your signaling. That's a really great advantage because you don't have to wait for the computer to boot and have it running and have to maintain that. You can just so much of what you can do with LCC, you can do without a central computer. And then when you add a computer, you can add more capability. So it's, it's good for trade-offs in that regard. Jeff or Dave, do you have any other comments on that?
Well, there is a question of scale, because when you're working with a real small layout, especially if you already have DCC controlled turnouts, there's really no impetus to change that. But if your DCC control has the ability to have a button to control it as well as the DCC signal, you could make that button be an LCC button. And then you can basically create an LCC system that uses your DCC drivers to make it happen. And the real benefit for LCC is not going to happen in a small layout like my room. It's really when you get a lot of people and a lot of stuff and you want to do signaling, and you may want to have a dispatcher sometimes. Maybe you don't, maybe you want ABS all the time and a dispatcher every now and then. And when you're going to get really big and you're going to have a lot of stuff going on, LCC takes all the overhead off the layout and puts it into a system that is more than capable of handling more than we can possibly figure out to do. So yeah, I'm a fan for big people. For us little guys, not necessarily, although I think if I were building this layout today, I would have put LCC tortoise machines in, because why not?
Yeah, I know the experimentation that you and I did, Jeff, on this last article on turnout control with the RR Circuits controller, they've reduced basically all the functions you need down to one wire. For a tortoise, you can get the feedback and the control on one wire through the Signal LCC device, and it integrates with JMRI beautifully. You get all the events that you need, and it even has local control with that. They have a touch toggle capability, so you can actually put a push button and get all of that benefit on one wire. That's hard to do on other systems, so that's a big advantage right there.
And you made up the point about not needing a computer, right? So you do need a computer to get things configured and set up. But once you're going, you can simply unplug it. And that's, the next step for me is to add push button toggles into my yard to control these same turnouts. So then I can either do it from JMRI or I can do it from a push button, but I don't then need to run around with my laptop to control turnouts. I can do it right from the layout. So I think that's a nice advantage. And I just simply, then the computer is not necessary unless you want to use it.
Yeah, and I think you're going to find that going forward that we're going to see the integration of DCC and LCC in terms of command stations and control, because it just makes sense to have them together. So I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing products come out where they integrate the functionality, or at least connect them together in a way that's much more integrated, because it just makes sense.
Yeah, well, the new controller from WOW, TCS, already has it so that if you have an LCC controlled turnout, you can name it with English words on their handheld and talk to it using the English words. So you can say yard throat west and turn it on from your handheld, switching between the two things. Now, admittedly, this is still a not quite product, but what I've seen of it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth keeping an eye out when we can actually get back together again and go to train shows and conventions. Keep an eye out for these new products and get a chance to go talk to the manufacturers. I mean, they'll love to talk to you and really pick their brain about what they're doing. I think it's important to understand that from an NMRA perspective, there's also a lot of work going on behind the scenes to kind of make sure all that stuff comes together from a standards perspective. I'm just going to speak because I'm on the DCC working group and understand what goes on behind the scenes with that. There's a lot of volunteers right now working to make sure that all this new development going forward all hangs together. Anyone who says that DCC is tired and old doesn't know that what's going on is we're actually innovating and trying to really move it forward so that it keeps up with the hobby and it has a way forward for everybody. So and LCC is a very active group. It's still pretty young. It's I know it's been around for a while, but it's really been coming together lately and starting to get momentum. So that's the good news. The documentation, I know it's scary if you go online and read the specs. It's, it's nasty stuff to read. Not very exciting. But what comes out of that, though, is a system that really hangs together and works. So I think that's the right message I want to pass on.
And the programmers are working constantly. The volunteer, I point out, programmers are working constantly to make it easier for us.
Right.
Just last couple of weeks, they decided that when you open the program, when you open the node now, it only opens the headers. So you don't get confounded by the 3 pages of options you have. And really you can just open the line that you want to deal with and you're all set. And that's just like, this just happened literally last couple of weeks. And you're like, wow, that makes so much sense. Okay.
Yeah, I have to say, the first time I opened up the configuration panel for the Signal LCC node, I just about fell out of my chair. I mean, it was pages. It is pages of settings, and you're like, "What do I do with this?" Now, okay, so you have to stop and take it one piece at a time. Look, and there's things that there are many options that you don't need to touch. There's a few that you do, and so you got to learn. I think like anybody, start small. Learn the basics and understand what you need to do to get things started. And then as you get more brave, start taking on bigger chunks. So, it's, that's just good. I think that's true for any new technology or new thing that comes out. And one of the things that I think people have to recognize with LCC is that, and like anything with, in the hobby, unlike, a large scale commercial product company, right, that would produce, consumer devices that millions of people buy, our hobby isn't that big. And so, you're not going to get the kind of, user documentation or ease of use kind of stuff out of the box. I mean, it's not super practical to expect that. Now, some of it, I think you could argue, could be better, sure. But the way I think of helping to fill those gaps is to, use our collective interest in the hobby to work together on it. And I think that'll get us there faster than waiting for someone to write a book on it. But, there are books, there's articles,
Yeah, and I think it is evolving too, right? So there was a question we got about someone's using toggle switches to control their turnouts, but JMRI isn't recognizing the turnout position on the panel.
Right.
I think if you go toggle it back on JMRI, it then finally realizes really where that turnout is. But I'm not sure if the new board that RR Circuits has put out will help solve that problem or not, because I'm not using that yet, so I need to experiment with it. But I did read something about, well, what's happening is the push button sends an event, right? So there's a little, it adds a little electricity to a circuit for the time the button is down, so that fires an event off. And so you need to create some secondary sensor within JMRI to consume that event, and then use that consumed event to change the panel turnout position. So but like that to me is still okay. I don't really get it, right? So I mean, I think I sent that to you guys earlier before we even started and said, I don't really understand this answer yet. And so that means I need to dive in and play with it to try to get it to work myself. And so that's, I think, where we're a little bit further, it's new, right? So we're a little further behind we'd like to, but new stuff is coming out every day that's making our lives easier. And then we need people like us and others that are out there that are newbies to start writing up some things, and so that we kind of get it boiled down to a more simple implementation that people like me can figure out and understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I know one of the things that for me was easy to understand is when I started reading that the LCC uses this producer consumer model. I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that is, but I realized, wait a second, not everyone knows what that is. Like, I know that because it came up in my, in my day job, and it's certainly a relatively modern thing to use in our discussions, talking about these systems. But yeah, okay, so we should probably talk about what that means. And it makes it sound complicated or mysterious because it's new language, but actually it's a relatively simple concept. It's just that we're not used to hearing things like that. The other thing which, pops in, I know that with that panel question, what you're talking about is understanding how the system remembers what's going on, or how does it know, when a push button event happens on the front panel, what happens to it inside the system, right? Where does that go? And if nobody's really listening to it, or if whoever's listening to it isn't doing the right thing, then you'll get weird behavior. And so, you have to kind of get your head around, when I cause A to happen, what do I expect to happen to B, and then C, and then D? And that's all stuff you have to put into the tool. It's not going to necessarily guess it for you. And you do have to learn enough about that to be able to do that. But I think once you kind of get your head around what it's trying to tell you, it's actually a pretty simple way to think about it. Chuck had asked some questions ahead of our talk today, and one of them is an interesting question. I think we've kind of answered the first two, but one of them, the last one is LCC just for people that have signaling or DC powered turnouts on their layouts? And I think, unfortunately, I think the answer is I don't know, because there's so many things you can do with LCC. I don't know what you're trying to do. Certainly for signaling or turnout control, panels, and that kind of thing, it makes your life much easier. The example of what I think I know Jeff is doing on the layout he's helping put together, where you want to simplify the operation of the railroad, right? Specify a route with a button, and then not make that, if you hit a button and then a bunch of things happen, that's a really great, model for what it can do for you. And it's not terribly difficult to set up. I think the big difference that people should need to understand is that unlike previous generation hardware solutions, where you were building hardware, diode matrices and controllers, JMRI gives you, and the programming panel from JMRI to the LCC devices gives you a software solution, so that once you get the hardware set up, it does what you want. But if you change your mind, you're not rewiring anything. You're not tearing things down. You're not back onto the layout. In fact, you can change an LCC node from across the house, across the internet, because it's a network device. And as long as you have access to the control computer, you can modify it. I would say maybe put some internet security in there for good measure, but that's a different topic for another time. But that's a great advantage, because I don't know about you, but I don't like crawling under the layout like anybody else. And if I have to go in and change things, I'd rather do it sitting at my desk and with a nice monitor, and so that's an advantage. And if that kind of thing is what you want to do to work with your layout, then even for simple layouts or relatively small layouts, that's actually a nice feature. The other thing I will say is that LCC right now scales pretty nicely, right? You don't have to make a big investment to get into LCC. The minimum, we're talking about the starter kit from LRR Circuits is sub $100 for everything you need to start a layout, and then the nodes are sub $100 to add additional capability. And really, that's that can kind of grow with you. You don't have to invest all at once. You can do it over time. You can decide how you want to scale, and that's not something you have to do all at once. So it's actually relatively low cost of entry. I think, Jeff, I know you looked at, really carefully at the, there's a cost per pin or a cost per button or whatever metric you want to use, and it's definitely comparable to that today, and getting better.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think Jeff you did an LCC clinic on a previous NMRAX session, which is out on YouTube. So I would recommend people watch that, because it really broke things down pretty well. But I think you were talking about the cost drivers in that presentation as well. So
yeah, I was basically setting up tortoise machines for Jerry's layout, and I looked into, once you have the tortoise machines, you have to spend a certain amount of money to control them. At the very least, you're talking about a toggle switch. You might want a toggle switch and a relay. And I actually looked at those sequences. Jerry really wants to have dispatcher control at some point, and definitely wants control panels. So at the very least, we had to have some sort of a remote controllable thing. And I looked at the pricing, and basically LCC per turnout is within $1 of everybody else. So you're not it's not like you're being expensed out. And as you say, once you've put in the first node, putting another node in is just another couple Cat5 cables, and those are available at Home Depot and are cheap. So it's all good.
If you're really cheap, you can make your own. Although, why when they're so cheap to buy them? But yes,
Totally.
There's time and money, right? So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's true. Time and money is important. I think from a design point of view too, the advantage of having a pretty straightforward implementation under the layout makes a lot of sense. If you can collect all of your wires into one spot, you're going to have areas where there's dense wiring and areas where there's not so much, and you want to be able to span those regions easily. The network cables are a great way to do that. And if you're debugging something, you can patch something in or take something out by unplugging a connector. It's really pretty straightforward to do that. So it makes it easy. And we're not trying to sell these things. We're just sort of looking at it like, hey, what's the trade-offs?
Yeah. And being able to use those quick links on the Tortoise machines, the latest version of that, which puts the interface on the Tortoise machine itself and just runs an 8 or 10-pin ribbon cable from one to the next, and basically gives you complete control over the Tortoise as well as feedback. And that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So what Jeff was talking about, the quick link is a RS Circuits, a new product from them. It basically plugs into the back of a Tortoise. It has a 10-pin ribbon cable connector, which you can also buy or make. And if you have a bunch of Tortoises in the same area, you just have these ribbon cables that pop between them, and you don't have to break out the wires or do any soldering or crimping or anything. You just run these cables like jumpers around, and it sorts it all out in the software. It knows where they are, and you can control the whole. What is it? I think it's 8 turnouts.
Yeah, 8 turnouts on each cable. Yeah,
8 turnouts in one node, and that's really handy, right? And so it's coming.
You're telling me I shouldn't have soldered on all those Molex connectors onto my I'll just switch to these boards.
Hey, whatever works.
Well, you're working now, right? So why change it? But yeah, I mean, you
exactly.
I find Tortoises are pretty reliable, but if you ever have to swap one, you can, you'll be able to take it off real quick.
Yeah, and I'm working, but I've also I don't have feedback and I don't have toggle switches yet, so that's
right.
I think like I said, these things evolve and it simplifies life a lot, right? So I can put the toggles in. I have to create some input-output device to consume those events and then throw the Tortoises. So I'll need some more boards somewhere. It's more things to figure out versus things that are now plug and play. So
yeah. So Jeff and I wrote up this quick link device. We wrote up in a Hub article. It's coming out, and that's one example. But there's as products evolve, there'll be other features like that. The goal of our circuits is to provide the functionality that you need to get your road to work. And this is a big spot. Yes. Signals can be a real nightmare because you've got all of the connections to all the LEDs. And one of the things that I was confused about when I first started reading the Signal LCC manual was he wasn't talking about LEDs. He wasn't saying wire this bit to this color. He was talking about aspects. The conversation was about, what do you want to show? What does the aspect mean? How are you going to tell the system what your aspect means? And I'm like, oh, you mean like the railroads do? Oh, that's really cool. Like, of course the lights just work. And it's just kind of funny.
Well, when he was explaining it online, and the first thing he does is shows an actual switch cabinet that runs signals and points out in the switch cabinet where his logic matches the logic of the railroads. And I'm like, okay, you got it.
Yeah. And that's really fun. I've been on this adventure of learning signaling for a while now. It's just that topic alone, regardless of how it's implemented on your model, just figuring out how the railroad's actually signaling and why they did it. I mean, it sounds easy on the surface, but when you understand how they actually use the signals to make traffic move efficiently and safely, it's a complicated thing. I built. I think everyone's had to build. Hasn't everyone had to build the little crossing gate controller that makes the lights go up, flash and the gate go up and down? I had to do that with a Arduino just because I did. And even that was like, oh, but you got to do approach. You have to wire the approaches, and you have to, like, oh, that's not that easy. And you look at the railroad circuits, and you go, oh, it was hard for them too, huh? So that's pretty cool stuff. I don't know. Is anyone watching the chat? Do we have any chat questions that have come up?
We do, Eric. First question is actually a series of 3 questions. Is there a servo support? Is microcontroller integration available? And is LOT, now there's a lot of acronyms, so I'm not sure if that's spelled right or not, but LOT integration available. So is there servo support? Is microcontroller integration available? And is LOT integration available?
Well, for servo support, we're in the chip deprivation era right now, and RR Circuits has developed a servo controller board, but they can't get the chips for it and won't be able to for about a year at this point. It will run, I think, 12 servos from one node, so it's there right now. You can use just a contact closure out and use a servo driver from there's a couple companies that make them. You can make, and they basically just turn on from, you switch this switch on if you want a red light over yellow, and you switch this switch on if you want green over red or whatever. It's a little more funky, but as I say, what we were discussing earlier is that insofar as being able to show an actual display on the thing, the drivers are there right now. You can do it with LEDs. The circuit board to do it with servos is made, but won't be available for a while.
And for so understand that LCC is an open standard, and the documentation for this is online under what's called OpenLCB. OpenLCB is the open standard that kind of feeds NMRA LCC. So if you want to go and download code and play with a microcontroller, this source code is there. And I'm not particularly interested in that solution, but it's definitely out there and available. The third question might be IoT.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
It's Internet of Things, and that's another. It's sort of a ubiquitous term for putting a computer on everything, light switches and light bulbs and you name it. And I don't know whether there's IoT devices that necessarily understand LCC, but there's no reason why you can't experiment with that stuff. It's a hobby like anything else, and that stuff is widely available on the open market if you want to play with devices.
Yeah, one thing to just piggyback on both of those items is people like RR Circuits. Everything has an address, and it's what is it, 8 bytes or within the address.
Yeah.
And so the every manufacturer has their own prefix, let's say, and then each device adds to that address. So everything you buy is guaranteed to be unique. But there's also a set of addresses that have been set aside by the group for individual personal use. So therefore, if you're building your own devices, so to speak, to do whatever you want them to do, you can create your own addresses. And I believe there's a registry where you can go and kind of sign up for those. And as long as you're not using it on someone else's layout, it doesn't matter. You'll never have a conflict. But that is available.
I believe one of the address spaces available is for NMRA members. You can actually stick your NMRA number in and use that as part of the address. And so it is unique to you because you're the only one that has your NMRA number. And
further on the IoT thing, the LCC network does not have to be a CAN network. It can be Ethernet. So you could do an Ethernet to CAN adapter, which exists, and connect that to your house if you want to do IoT things.
Yeah, so you could have Wi-Fi, LCC over. I mean, that's actually, so I don't want to get too technical in terms of jargon, if I can help it, but one of the nice architectural design decisions they made with LCC was they didn't commit to making it a specific set of wires, if you will. They separated the network from the physical implementation or the physical wires, and so you need a way to get there. If you're going to wire things together, you need to understand how the wires work. In this case, the current products use the CAN bus, and that's because CAN is a industry standard. It's used in automobiles, has been since the 70s. It's the way that cars talk to, inside cars talk to things to each other in a reliable way, and so
it has a hierarchy, and it has a hierarchy and a high level of data correction. So it's really, really good for adverse atmosphere.
Right. Yeah, and we have a lot of that kind of interference going around in our layouts, and especially if in modules, for example. And so, unlike DCC, which doesn't have a whole lot of protection in there, just kind of you just keep sending packets and hope some of them get through. Dirty track and all that. LCC is meant to be much more robust.
Yeah. And as much as there's not a lot of great documentation out there, there are some clinic presentation that Dick Bronson has done on the RR Circuits website that are great overviews of LCC and kind of how it came to be. And so all of these things we're talking about now are really pretty well laid out in those presentations. So it's a good resource.
Okay. So another question that came up is about when will the preliminary standards for LCC be approved? Because there was two people that asked about standards. One is when they're going to be approved, and the other is, are they being embraced by the industry? Because this individual, one of the individuals, is interested in a clock and a fast clock over LCC, so he can control some things by time of day. So if you want to comment on that.
So I don't know specifically what stage the standardization is in terms of approval. I think it's an adoption issue with NMRA at this point. The Open LCB group has been doing this stuff for a while, and I think it's in process. So you can go to the standards section of the NMRA website and keep an eye on things, but I don't think it's far off. I would say that if you're really motivated and interested, get involved. Those groups are all volunteer. So if you want to help drive the direction and help the group make decisions and bring things faster, go raise your hand. I'm sure they could use the help and would appreciate it. So this is John Doring talked about this recently, and I've adopted it as my own. We are the NMRA, and I mean that very, very seriously. This is a member organization, and we're all part of it. So I think as much as we can contribute, as much as you use it, I think you'll find things work really, really well.
Okay. Another question was, is LCC lighting control currently under development?
Well, you can certainly do lighting control because there is a relay board that can be driven by LCC, so you can turn lights on. And I'm not sure what more than that you're talking about. Basically, what you're doing when you're doing any of these things is moving a button push or a computer saying, do this, to someplace on the layout and have it done. And if you're talking about turning lighting on, you're talking about turning a switch on, and we can do that.
Okay. All right. There's one question that was really specific to this one user. He has a pair of nodes, a signal LCC and a BOD4-CP on each end of an industrial area, and have them set up in the CDI to handle signals and occupancy for the area. How does he copy the correct, except for the event IDs, CDI info to 4 other sets of nodes, so I don't have to program them each set manually?
JMRI. You got to make a copy on JMRI and put it in the other nodes.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. And the last question I saw was, what about N-scale switches turnouts for T-track?
For T-track?
Yeah.
I mean, any switch or turnout that you can control electronically, not mechanically, but electronically, you can control with LCC.
Okay.
I mean, I'm pretty safe in saying that. The ones that are just mechanical using a speedometer cable or whatever, no, that's you still would have to put a solenoid on that in order to be able to control that electronically. But anything you already can control by pushing a button, there is probably a way to make it be done with LCC. If at the very least, just putting a relay on it in place of that button.
Okay. Okay, and I think that was all the questions that I saw in the YouTube and the Facebook chat. So if you want to wrap it up in the next 2 or 3 minutes.
Sure.
Excellent.
Well,
What
I would say is just make sure, you try it. I think the starter kits from our circuits are great because they give you everything you need. I am looking at some occupancy detection later. That's got me a little bit freaked out, right? So, do I control the blocks of the switch, the turnouts themselves versus just the tracks, blah, blah, blah. But I just say, dive in. The water's fine.
Dave, don't freak out. Call me. I'm not that far away. I'm vaccinated now, so it's all good.
Yeah, and the RR circuits occupancy stuff is all remotable, which is really very nice. You can put the transformers right where you need them, and the circuit board up to like 20 feet away. So it's all good.
Yeah, and I think if you're not if you're in doubt, reach out and talk to somebody. We'll be getting together in person again soon, but we're available online. And meet up with your local division or your folks when they have events and talk to each other and help each other out, and you'll get there.
Okay.
We'll leave this LCC at NERx.org email address up for the foreseeable future. So and we believe NERx is going to kind of continue ongoing, so that website will stay. So reach out.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think it was a very informative panel. I don't know anything about LCC, so it was very informative to me. And like you said, if anybody has any questions, reach out to lcc@nerx.org. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is a layout tour of the freelanced Vermont Railway. The layout owner was influenced by the Vermont Rail System and Rutland Railroad in building his HO scale freelanced Vermont Railway layout. The layout is 25 by 22 feet with nearly 100 feet of mainline, and the late summer, early fall scenery is 90% complete, with the quarry area the only portion remaining. The layout features operating signals and a CTC panel using NMRA to interface with the layout during operating sessions. Let's take a look at Bob Cochran's Vermont Railway.
I'm Bob Cochran. Welcome to my Vermont Rail Systems layout. My layout is a freelance following Vermont Rail System and the Rutland Railroad Bellows Falls subdivision from North Walpole, New Hampshire to Rutland, Vermont, set in the late summer and early fall in Vermont. Size of the layout room is approximately 25 by 22 L shape. I have 96 feet of point to point. Also, I can run a continuous loop, which is about 106 feet. And I usually use the loop to give through trains more running distance during operating sessions. Max grade is 2% with 24-inch radiuses. I use NCE Powerhouse DC system with radio and non-radio cabs. Also, I have a Railroad Circuit simple serial bus local net to run my signalmen, watchmen, and tower products. I also use the NMRA for operating my CTC panel for signals and turnouts controls. All my locomotives have decoders, sound decoders in them by QSI, Soundtracks, and ESU. I have operating grade crossings installed in 3 locations with bells and flashing lights. So let's sit back and enjoy the layout. Okay, this is my Rutland yard. This is the northern terminus of the railroad. I have some staging tracks in the front, and roundhouse, operating turntable, diesel house on the other end, with industries that are switched out during operating sessions. Some of the structures are kit bash, scratch built, and from kits. Salt extra getting ready to leave Rutland, heading to Bellows Falls. Crew has a green signal at the output of the yard. The tunnel area from this area is a representation of what's in Bellows Falls, Vermont. Even though it's out of place on the layout, it fits into this area of the layout the best. train now is approaching the summit, which is the highest point on the layout. Starting our descent down from the summit to Ludlow. Dynamics kicking in. Now we're coming into one of the key control points I have on the layout. These turnouts are totally dispatch control along with the signals. This is the Ludlow station. I have a little spur track that goes off here into what I call the Ludlow Spur. It goes into a little set of industrial tracks. This is a separate operation on the layout. Crew comes up from North Walpole with the train, makes a couple stops along the way, and then gets up here, and then they have to switch. From the first look at it, it looks like it's just fairly straightforward in and out, but guys get all confused, and you have to figure out where your engine's going to be at in the train to go in, because you can go in there with all the cars you need to switch out and not have to come out onto the main line. But it takes a little bit of planning, and I've had guys get really frustrated. Now we're coming into the town of Ludlow area. Most of the buildings are kits and scratch built. Candy's Farm is after my grandfather. He was a produce farmer here in the state of Connecticut for a number of years. So when Bar Mills came out with this kit, I got it. I had to get it. This is also where Ludlow control point is. Notice on the bungalow, they got a little maintenance call light. I can control that from my CTC panel. I can turn it on and off. You know, so when it's on, the train is supposed to stop and call the dispatch. Might be getting some information. Elwood Scrap Iron is named after one of the guys in our Friday night group. Also in the layout, I have several areas where there is locked turnouts, and they have to, the crews have to call dispatch to get permission to unlock the turnout, and then the dispatch will unlock it, and then they can control the turnout. The reason for locked turnouts is to prevent crews operating turnouts that are on the main line and leaving them in an open position or coming out onto the main line when they're not supposed to. This also lets the dispatcher know that somebody is working in an area. Along the layout, I have maps, track diagrams of the areas with all the names of the track and industries, showing the signals, their names. These signals are all scratch built from Oregon rail parts using brass tubing. I use their signal heads, bases, ladders, and the maintenance platform. See, the LEDs in the double-headed masts are Railroad Circuit's 3-color LEDs they have. Well worth the time and money to buy them from them. Not a plug for them, but they are great. They come wired with already all the leads, and they're very easy to install. The other single head searchlights are all red-green LEDs. Some of the details I have here in the at this control point are, I have switch heaters, the propane tanks, electric switch motors on the side, bungalow, telephone box, Now it's coming into the second control point on the layout. This is where you can come out from the hidden staging yard or go up to the quarry. One of the problems I have in this area is that over here I have hidden track underneath with turnouts, and I had to come up with a way to figure out how to get into it. So this section of the layout is removable, and I can remove it. Now I can get to my tortoises and to my tracks that go into the staging yard, and I can also reach underneath the Ficardi rails on the very tight radius going up to the quarry. And then it just goes back in here like this, and voila, it works out pretty good. Now we're coming into the North Walpole Yard. This is the North Walpole Yard. This is an actual representation of the yard in a condensed version. It's got just about all the tracks in there that were in the original plan. I got this out of Model Railroad magazine quite a few years ago. I think Scott Whitney was the one that had it, published an article. And this is the original section of the layout. There's been several revisions to this layout over the years, but this is the first section that I ever built, and it's still here. To the left of the roundhouse is where you go into the hidden staging. I have 3 tracks back there that I can store up to 3 trains in there. I usually keep the middle track open to so I can gives me different way out of town if I need to. And if you go to the right, the track follows around, and this gives me my continuous loop that comes out up in Ludlow, which goes into hidden track across the drop bridge. When we have operating sessions, I run my through freight through here at least once each way, and it gives me a little more running time. Right now we have a red signal because the drop bridge is down. When I put the drop bridge in the up position, it should change to green, to yellow, because the next signal up is at the control point, which is red. This is my quarry area. I have a little 45 tonner. Quarry number 1 and quarry number 2 are the lower and upper quarry. This area here is where the crew kind of starts their day out at the quarry. We keep supplies down here. Dynamite car down at the other end, the dynamite shack, and the crew car. Very steep grades and tight. Due to the steep grades, you only take one car at a time down the hill. This is my CTC panel done in NMRA. On the top row is the model board, turnout control levers next, signal levers, code buttons. When you push the code button, you hear all the relays working. There's switches on the bottom to control switch heaters, which actually don't work, but it's a function. Maintenance call light, which will come on at the bungalow at Ludlow. There's a what I call VSR out switch, and that controls the signals as whether they're going to be in ABS or in CTC mode. I hope everybody enjoyed the tour of my layout. I want to thank Rick Aberson for doing the filming and also for helping with the signal system and getting the right aspects that I needed and the details. I also want to thank another good modeler, John Grossner, for helping in several of the scenes on this layout by helping me getting the proper perspective and details that I needed. If anybody wants any additional information, they can contact me at gmrc405@aol.com, and I'll gladly try to help them out the best I can. Thank you.
Well, welcome back. That was a great layout. And by the way, Lou Sassy photographed Bob's layout for an upcoming article in Model Railroader. So we're going to take a few minute break, and we will be back in about 7 minutes, and we'll be on our next clinic this afternoon with Bill Brown talking about the NMRA Achievement Program. Next up is the first of two parts regarding the NMRA Achievement Program. In this part, the presenter will give an overview of the program. If you have questions about the program, email them to apchair@nernmra.org. Tomorrow, there will be a panel discussion about the program where your questions will be answered by a distinguished panel. For part one, I would like to introduce a master model railroader from the Central New York Division. He is the Achievement Program Chairman for the Northeastern region. He is also the NMRA National Contest Chairman, responsible for organizing the model contest at the NMRA National Conventions. Let's welcome Bill Brown.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Hello, folks, and welcome. I'm going to get started here because I got a lot to go through. I'm going to be sharing my screen with you here, so bear with me just for a second until we get to that point. And here we go. Folks, this is, as Chuck said, we're going to give you an overview of the achievement program here today. What I'm going to tell you is that I'm not going to read to you all the minutia of the requirements of the program. That would bore you, put you all to sleep. What I'm going to try to do is give you an overview of the program, and I'm going to try to show you how to find everything that you need, how to get started, how to organize yourself, and we're going to talk an awful lot about tips to help you along. Tips that I've learned along the way in first my quest to become a master model railroader, and also the perspectives that I've gained as the AP chair for the Northeastern region. Okay, so this will be your travel guide. That's what the achievement program, I profess it to be, your travel guide for your journey into model railroading. Again, Chuck mentioned it, but I'll call your attention to the bottom of the screen. And copy down that email address. We are not taking chat right now. We are not taking questions right now. But if you have any questions about the AP program, send them to that AP chair that you see at the bottom of the screen, and I will collate them, put them together, get them out to all of our panelists. And tomorrow at 3:30, we will be answering all of those questions live right here during NERx. So folks, the achievement program, if you get involved in it, what is the achievement program and what will it mean to you? First of all, it's an incentive to learn and to master new skills, exceptionally educational. It's a system of demonstrating things that you master, your level of skill in the hobby. You'll be issued certificates acknowledging your achievement. And of course, for those of you that are ambitious, the opportunity to achieve master model railroad status, which is a very prestigious place to be. So let's take a look at an overview of the program and what it's all about. Well, first of all, there are 11 categories of achievement. Now, that 12 in parentheses up there if you include the Golden Spike. The Golden Spike Award is generally the one that people start out with, the easy one to accomplish. It gets you involved in the program. It usually is your first one, doesn't have to be your first one. But you can see then that there are 11 categories of achievement in 4 different kind of realms. Okay, and we're going to talk about all of those here a little bit further. And of course, the ultimate goal is, hopefully for a lot of you, is to become a master model railroader. Again, here are all the different categories in the 4 different realms. And as you start to accomplish them, let's talk about how you earn a certificate in each one of those 11 categories. Well, first of all, you must be an NMRA member. You got to complete all the requirements for that category. And then you submit to your division AP chair what's called the Statement of Qualifications form. We often refer to it as the SOQ form. And with that, you would attach all of your supporting data that's required that you're going to see here in a few minutes. Again, I want to remind you to submit them to your division AP chair, not directly to me as the region chair. Your division AP chair will check through things and then get them to me. Paper copies are good. You can send them through snail mail, or you can scan them and email them to your division person. I generally prefer them to be scanned and emailed to me because that's the way I send them on to national. But if you're not, if that's not something that you can do, paper copies are certainly fine. Let's talk about the chain of submission. First, it goes to your division achievement program chair. That person will check through to make sure that you've accomplished everything on that checklist. And then it goes off to me as the region AP chair. Generally, I try to get things out within a couple of days onto national, but I say that I will not take any more than 2 weeks. If I'm busy or something, I'll get them off to Frank Koch at national. And all of you are going to meet Frank Koch tomorrow night. If you don't know him already, tomorrow at 3:30, he will be part of our panel. He's the national assistant manager. When he gets the submission, then for me, he batches them all, which means he throws them all in a pile, and he deals with them all on the 23rd of every month. He deals with them once a month, not only from the NER, but from all across the nation, all the different regions in the country. When he's done with it, he types up, prints out the certificates, and then he sends them back to the regional chair. He'll send it back to me. When I get it again, I try to get everything out to people right away, but I say that, you know, it'll definitely be within 2 weeks after I get it. I take the certificate, I put it in a frame, box it up, and then I send it back to the division AP chair. With the idea that the division AP chair is going to present it to you at some kind of a division meeting. We think that's the appropriate way to do it. And then every fall at our NMRA, NER, our Northeastern Region Convention, at the banquet, which is usually Saturday night, but sometimes it's Sunday morning and a breakfast, we will acknowledge you if you can be there. Call you up, congratulate you, because getting each one of these certificates is a very prestigious thing, we believe. If you don't know where you are within the Northeastern region as far as what your division is called, if you haven't been involved, it's one thing you got to get familiar with. So find yourself on the map and what the name of your division is. And once you know what your division is, and again, all this stuff is online too if you need to find it at some point. These are the Northeastern Region Achievement Program chairmen. If you got a pencil and paper and you want to write some things down, I'm not going to put this slide up for very long because I got a lot I want to get through today. But those are the various people that I work with directly in each division when there is a submission. Again, I want to remind you, and I'll say this a few times, I'll repeat it. There's that address again. If you have questions as we go through this, please email them to me today, so I can collate them later tonight or early tomorrow morning to get them to our panel of experts who are going to answer all the questions at 3:30 tomorrow. All right, let's spend a little time about how you get organized. All right, you decided you want to get involved in the achievement program, maybe someday become a master model railroader. How do you organize yourself? All right, well, first of all, you have to become familiar with the National Model Railroad Association.org website. Hopefully you have web access and you can get on somebody's computer and get to that. And now it's important that when you get to the opening page here, what do I do to find things involved in the achievement program? Well, if you look at the line right across that says home and it goes across the page, those are live tabs. The education tab is the one that the achievement program is under. And when you click on that education tab, you'll see a drop down come down below it. And one of the choices will be the achievement program. If you drop your cursor down and you click on achievement program, this is what's going to come up. It's an introductory page, and then you can see by the red arrows as you look to the side, you can see all of the different tabs that are live to get information on the achievement program. The categories that there are, the requirements, all the forms you might need, frequently asked questions, and master's articles are very valuable because they give you insights to the people that have been through the program about some of the pitfalls you might have and how to jump over some hurdles and all those different kinds of things. When I started the program, the first thing I did when I decided I wanted to get into this is I put together a notebook for myself. I got myself a 3-ring binder, and in that 3-ring binder, I made a tab for each of the 11 plus golden spikes, so 12 different categories that I was going to be looking at. And in that, what I did is I went on the NMRA website and I printed the statement of qualifications form in each of the 11 categories, or 12 if you count golden spike. What this is a great thing to do. It's a great checklist. It shows you exactly what you need to accomplish in order to get that award. I won't go through this here, but you can see what I did then is I punched these out, put them in my 3-ring binder in each of those sections, and then I spent a little bit of time going through it. And what I did is I took a yellow highlighter, and I highlighted all the things within that particular category that I think I've already accomplished. So I don't have to go much beyond that. I've already done this. I've already done that. And then after I've gone through each of those categories and kind of highlighted, then I take a look at where I am and I set goals for myself. And as an example, I used to be an educator before I retired. I was a football coach for a long time, and we talked with our kids about goal setting all the time. If you don't have a path and selected a path and then decided how you're going to move forward on that path, it's really hard to get to where you want to be. So here is a sample of what your goal setting might look like. You might say to yourself, this month I'm going to submit for my golden spike. You might say to yourself, I'm very close to accomplishing all the tasks that are required for author and cars. Those are the two that I think I'm the closest to after I did my initial analysis. So right now, we're in April. I might say to myself, well, during May and June, I'm going to scratch build 2 remaining cars that I need to build. That because I had a number of them that I already scratch built and built and detailed. Well, now I need 2 more. I've determined this is a sample. I need 2 more. So I'm going to build them during May and June. Then July 1st, I will compile all my cars paperwork with my photos and submission, and I'm going to get them into to my division AP chair. Next goal I might set is during August, I'm going to copy and submit all my author works because I feel like I've done a lot of things there and I don't have much left to do. And then during the fall NER convention this coming year, I'm going to be honored with these 3 awards, the Golden Spike, my cars, and my author awards. Then I'm going to reassess, and I might say then during 2022, I'm going to focus on 2 more submissions. What are my next 2 that I think I'm on my way to? And then the ultimate goal, you might say to yourself, by 2025, I want to be a master model railroader. So again, just a way of getting you organized. So as I said before, starting out with a golden spike is usually where people start. It can come further down the road, but it's something that's very easy for most people to accomplish. You start out with 8 square feet. It doesn't have to be an entirely completed layout. It can be a section of your layout, 8 square feet. And you can go through the requirements. There are requirements for rolling stock and structures and things like that. But the important thing in Golden Spike is that there is no judging for merit in this category. Meaning people are just going to check things off when they check your layout to make sure you have everything. But there's no merit scoring. You don't have to achieve anything here in order to get your golden spike. Now, what do we mean by this judging and evaluating? Because each of the other 11 categories do have what's called judging or evaluating. Not all 11. The ones that involve building things, scenery, cars, motive power, structures, those have evaluations of your models done where they need to achieve a certain level. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what that means. First of all, if my model is judged at the division level, each of our divisions have a bunch of certified judges, and your AP chair can tell you who they are. If you decide that you're ready to be judged, get in touch with your AP chair, and they will assign 2 judges. You have to have 2 judges to judge things, 2 either to come to your house or to meet you somewhere with your models in order to judge them. I established this 8 years ago because we had a problem within our region of having enough certified judges. So I established a process that I think has worked very well. We have what we call certified judges. These are people that are NMRA members. They're really experienced. They're far along in the AP program, and they really have the knowledge of the program and the expertise for judging. As determined by the division AP chair, because that's the person who chooses the judges within each division. I established a program that I call the apprentice judging, where the division AP chair can choose some people who they first are an NMRA member, they're a certificate holder in that category, and they want to learn the process of judging. They have some expertise, and at first they are teamed with a certified judge. They have to be with a certified judge initially when they go out to judge. The 2 of them, one would be certified, one would be apprentice. When the division AP chair feels real comfortable that this person now knows what they're doing, then they will be designated as a certified judge. So this is a good program to get more people involved in each division at the judging. All right, how does that judging take place? Well, as I said before, locally in your division, your AP judges can judge your stuff privately. Other ways it can be done, you can enter your models in a division model contest. You can enter them in a regional model contest or even at the national contest, and they'll be scored. This is the judging form that's used. It's a little different if you go to a contest, but if it's judged locally, this is what it looks like. You can see that there are 5 factors to the judging: construction, detail, conformity, finish and lettering, and scratch built. Now, I'm not going to go through all the detail of what each one of those mean. You can find them on the website, but if you have, now this particular form here is for master builder cars. If you have a car that you want judged, the 2 judges that come to look at it will score it. And it shows you there right after how many points can be awarded, up to a certain number of points, with the total being 125 points. Merit quality is 87.5 of the 125 points. So you can see it doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to have a degree of goodness to it. Taking a look at the construction factor in that judging, this is what, there's a couple of different forms of this that are out there, but this is what your judges will use. When they look at the construction, which is the quality and the workmanship of your model, on this chart, you have 2 axes. You have the left-hand vertical axis and you have the top horizontal axis. On the left axis, they're looking at the scope and complexity. Is it from simple to complex? How simple or complex is your model? And they'll make a determination by moving down that column on the left. If it's very complex, it might be down at M, N, O, P in that particular row. If it's a very simple model, it's going to be closer to the top. Then what they're going to do is move on out the horizontal axis. And how well did you do the construction, from poor all the way to exceptional? So as an example, if it's a pretty complex model, it might be an N on the left-hand axis and moves all the way out to where it's very, very well done. It might be a 34, 35, something like that. And that's the number of points that they score it out of the 40. So that just shows you an example of how it's done. And I'm not going to go through them all here because they're on the website and I can email these to you if you want, but you can see it's a very similar process for the 20 points of detail, the quantity of detail that you've added to that model, from complex and simple all the way to a little bit added to a whole lot of detail added. In the conformity factor, you can see it's very similar process as well. We're looking at the prototypicality of the model. How does it conform to the prototype that you're trying to address by building that model? And again, you have two axes to judge that. Here's appearance, which is the quality and skill of the finishing, the painting, the lettering, all of that kind of thing. And again, a very similar type of thing with the vertical axis being simple to complex, the horizontal axis across the top from poor to exceptional for the quality of what you've done. There's another factor called scratch building. For scratch building, very similar type of thing, but this is kind of a mathematical type thing. How much of it did you scratch build? What percentage of the parts were scratch built? Now, there's a number of parts that are exempt from being considered scratch built. You don't have to build motors. You don't have to build the wheels, things like that. They're exempt from this. But of all the things that are not exempt, 90% of it has to be scratch built in order to get the maximum number of points, 15 points. We've already got some questions that were submitted to me in advance about this particular realm of judging. So we're going to answer some of those questions tomorrow at our 3:30 roundtable. And again, there's what it is. If you need to email me, there's the address again. I'll put it up a few times here. And we got a whole lot of questions that are going to be answered tomorrow. All right, so let's take a look at some of the categories. And again, I'm not going to spoon feed to you every single requirement. I'm going to talk about some broad types of things that might help you along. The first one being motive power, we're going to talk about. In Master Builder motive power, among a bunch of other things, you got to build 3 scale models of motive power. It's considered motive power if it rides on rails and is powered on its own, and it can be a number of different things. All 3 of your models need to be merit quality, 87.5 points or more, and one of them must be scratch built. And you can see that I have, oh no, there in red in parentheses, because this category is probably the least done. I mentioned before that I think I mentioned that you have to have 7 of the 11 categories of achievement in order to be a master model railroader. You don't have to have all 11 or 12. So this is the one that I find that is the least done, because that idea of scratch building a locomotive scares the living bejesus out of people. I'm here to tell you folks that it shouldn't. All right. Well, what qualifies as motive power? I think we're all familiar with these, and that's probably what scares people the most, because they say to themselves, how the heck am I going to scratch build something like that? I don't have the skills to do that. Well, what I'm here to tell you to do, folks, like I did when I went for my MMR, is think outside the box of things that you can build that might qualify. If it moves on rails, it's considered motive power. Well, here's some examples of things that with a little motor in them, put them on the rails, they're considered motive power. Some of those will be a heck of a lot simpler to make because, again, the wheels are exempt. They don't have to be scratch built. Some of these are made out of wood. Some of you might not have a great deal of talent with metal and shaping and welding, soldering metals. Well, there's a lot of different approaches to doing your motive power. How did I do this? And here's what I suggest you do. Go to Google. And in your Google line, Google railroad critters. And then after you press enter and a whole bunch of things come up on the page, where the red arrow is there, click on images. Click on images, and this is the kind of page you might get. A whole bunch of different critters that are used by the railroads that would be one heck of a lot easier to scratch build than trying to put together one of those brass locomotives with all the parts. Some of you may have the skills to do some of those things, and God bless you if you do. But if you don't, there are other approaches to this. This is one that I submitted as my scratch built. This is a picture that I took in Silverton, Colorado. It's the Silverton Northern Railroad's Casey Jones. It was they built this to cart executives around from mine to mine on the Silverton Northern Railroad. Eventually it was an ambulance, railroad ambulance, but you can see it's wood construction mostly, and I was able to put this model together, which I believe made about 91 or 92 points. So it was my scratch built, and it was merit quality in order to help me achieve this category. Now, I've got two other models that I have to do. They don't have to be scratch built. I only have to have one scratch built. So here's an example of something that can be done that meets the criteria of being super detailed. I started with a Proto 2000 commercial locomotive out of the box, okay? I then proceeded to paint it, weathered it. I added real coal, crushed coal into the bin. I added a scratch-built doghouse that I made out of wood. I put some clear crystal coat as water overflow, spilled it all over the top where the water would be put in from the water tank. I used stretch easy line bell cord, stretch easy line for the bell cord and the whistle cord. I added a cab floor extension from graded metal inside. I placed an engineer inside, and I believe there's also somebody shoveling coal in there. I put a sound decoder in, and this qualified as super detailed. I think it scored in the 90s somewhere. And again, it was my second of the models that I used for this. My third one at the time, the old house that we had a backyard G-scale railroad running around some little ponds and everything. This was an F-scale or a large scale mogul. It started from a Bachmann commercial loco kit. Actually, it wasn't a kit. It was right out of the box. I wasn't satisfied with the cab. I painted, weathered. I added scratch-built replacement cab because I wanted the cab to be a little different. I fabricated the windows from acetate in the cab. I fabricated the engineer's chair, crushed some coal again and spread it around on the floor. This one doesn't have a tender, but I spread it on the floor where it would have spilled off the shovel. I used thread for the bell and whistle rope. I super detailed, put the chain that you can see hanging across it. And like you typically see on some of these locomotives, toolboxes and various things sitting on the platforms. I added the engineer, and this, again, it achieved merit quality, and now it was my third and final model. So that's just a little insights into how I achieved this particular category. And it wasn't as hard as many people think it might be because it's three models, and the scratch building part of it is a little easier than some of you might anticipate. Let's take a look at Master Builder cars and some ideas going through here. Among the criteria that you'd find on the website, you need 8 operable railroad cars. Of those, 4 different types: passenger car, caboose, those kinds of things. 4 different types of cars. Out of those 8, 4 must be scratch built, and the others that are submitted must be super detailed. And any 4, either scratch built or your other cars that are super detailed, 4 of them need to establish the merit award, which is 87.5 points. This was one of the cars that I scratch built and submitted. This is the real one, folks. This is again in Silverton, Colorado. My son and I, when we were visiting out there, we climbed all over this sucker and took pictures from every different angle on this. And I set out to scratch build this. There's the model as it was displayed, the way it turned out. It's an F-scale model again. I want to tell you a little story about this model. I think what the point I'm trying to make here is not about accomplishing the cars specifically award. I want to tell you a little story about what I went through, and I think these will give you some tips for all the different categories, I believe. All right, now first of all, I ask you, if you're going in to this program where people are looking and evaluating your stuff, to go into it with an open mind. Use the constructive criticism that people give you to help improve your skills. Don't be defensive. We often are defensive when people look at things and you know, as I put 100 hours into something that I'm scratch building, sometimes I've got so much into it that I just don't see certain things that other people see anymore. So when you get it judged by people, the process generally has the judges will, on the back of the score sheets, do some critiquing. You know, this was very good, but maybe this ought to be a little bit better. When I built this model, the first thing I did is I presented it to our division judges for input, not to be judged yet. I just said, hey, look at this, guys. 2 guys looked at it and they told me, well, you know, I really like this and this, but, you know, maybe you ought to think about this and maybe that ought to be done a little better. And so I went back then and used their expertise and I made some improvements to it. I then presented it at a division meet. It scored 98 points. That's pretty darn good. I was pretty pleased with that, but you know, I wasn't satisfied because I wanted it to be better. So I took the comments that were on the score sheet and I went back home and I worked on it a little bit more. And then after making some improvements, I took it to a Northeastern Region convention. It now scored 114 points and got the trophy for the Baldwin Trophy, which is the best of show at Northeastern Region meets. Man, I was blown away by that. Pretty darn good. But I wasn't still satisfied. So what I did was I made some improvements again, according to what I read on the score sheets, and I entered it at the national convention with some more improvements. In Detroit in 2007, it achieved 123 out of the 125 points and was awarded the National Gold Award for Best of Show. And that opened up a whole lot of doors for me with this, which was really amazing. But the point I'm trying to make is don't be defensive. Take criticism, listen to people, and make your model better as you go, and it'll make you a better person and a better modeler. All right, if we look at cars then again, here are just 2 cars that have been submitted by people as their other cars. Remember, only 4 of the 8 need to be merit quality. So these are the others super detailed that you admit or that you submit. You can see both of them. The plastic grabs were taken off and metal grabs were put on. Pretty good job of rusting and weathering. You can't see the ends, but there are brake hoses and things like that on them. So these 2 cars weren't judged, but they're super detailed, so they qualify as 4 of my other cars in this category. Let's talk a little bit about the structures category. In the structures category, you got to build 12 scale model structures. There needs to be 6 different types. 1 of those types must be a bridge or a trestle, and 6 of the 12 must be scratch built, and the others must be super detailed. They're not, and 6 of them, any combination of the 6 needs to win the merit award for 87.5 judged points. It can be some of your scratch built, it can be some of your super detailed, doesn't matter. And then there'll be some other cars that are just super detailed that aren't judged. They aren't scratch built, but they are included in my submission. Well, first of all, what counts as a structure? Some are pretty obvious to all of us. Bridges and trestles, you got to have 1 bridge or trestle as your submission. So that's a pretty easy one to figure out what it is. What else counts as a structure? Some are very obvious too. These are some that were submitted. I'm sure some of the guys that built these are out there watching this presentation right now because they were pictures that were submitted to me as their submission. That's easy. Some of these are very obvious. But then there are some things that are not so obvious that are also considered by the NMRA to be structures. Signal towers are structures. Any non-powered vehicle. This one doesn't have a motor, but it is, so it's considered a structure. And I think it's pretty darn good. I think Dick Elwell did that one. It's pretty darn good. So that is considered a structure. What other things are not so obvious? Power line towers, power poles. Somebody out there I know of is smiling right now that submitted that wigwag, because we've gone full circle on this. But yes, wigwags are considered as one of your structures. What else is not so obvious but you might consider? A crane. Crane is a structure. A boat that you scratch build or whatever, super detailed, those can be considered structures as well. Let's take a look at the scenery category and just talk about some tips and techniques here that might help you. In the scenery category, you're looking at a section of your model railroad. Again, it does not have to be a completed model railroad. You might have a section that's completed that meets the size guidelines on the website, and I won't go through them now, but you can look them up yourself what they are. Your scenery will be judged, and your two judges have to give you a merit score of 87.5. All right. What are the judges looking at when they look at your scenery? They're looking at the terrain. They're looking at the structures and how they fit into your scenery. They look at your background, your backdrop, your wall behind, what that looks like. They're going to look at lighting. They're going to look at lighting inside your buildings, those types of things, your lighting of your overhead lighting, those kind of things for the appearance, the real, how striking is it? And they're going to look for realism. Those are the 5 different things, the aspects that they look for when they're judging scenery. Well, here's some tips for you, folks. When I am judging, just little bugaboos of mine. Whenever I look at a scene, one of the things I think about first is, as it rains, where's the water going? Sometimes, we might build something on a sheet of plywood or whatever, and we just don't think about that. We do the roads, we do the track, we do, scenery and everything, but we forget where's the water going. Remember, water has to have a place to go, and they create very, very unique places on your layout. So think about that. It's just a little bugaboo of mine, and it can really enhance your layout. Here's a little swampy area with some dead trees growing up out of it. Little things that I think can enhance what you're doing. We talked about background. This it just happens to be on my home layout, but it has a backdrop, a printed backdrop put on it. And those are things that just add the depth to the scene and just make them, something that really pops out at you. They're going to look at lighting. You can see there's some street lights here. There are some lights inside some of the buildings. It's starting to get dark. There's a glow from behind the mountains of where the sun went down. So, just little things that you might think of that would enhance how the judges look at your particular scene. All right, let's look at prototype models. Another one of our categories is prototype models. You need to construct a scene in order to qualify for this particular award. And you need to be able to show how it is like an actual prototype scene. All right, here you see an actual prototype scene. It's a really rugged area with this train wrapping around, coming out of a tunnel across a bridge with a waterfall. So this might be a section that you're going to try to model. And here is a modeled scene of that particular area. Is it exact? No. But it has the feel of it. It has that locomotive coming around the corner out of the tunnel. It has the waterfall. It has the river in front. It has the steep cliff sides. So this is a particular one that might be done. Here's another prototypical scene. This is a mine out in Colorado. Yeah, you've probably figured out I love Colorado. That's what I model. This is a scene called the Belden Mines area, the Tennessee Pass line of Colorado. Very unique area. And here's a modeled scene of the same thing. Again, is it exact? No. But you see the river coming under the bridge that's kind of been compressed a little bit. You see the models. You got to display certain number of models on it. You see the structures, the mine head and everything that have been scratch built. So you can see it's very similar to the scene. Here's another picture from another angle, which shows the mine head. This is an actual picture gotten off the internet in real life, and the modeled scene from pretty much the same area. You can see the tracks in the model scene haven't been abandoned yet like they are in the real scene. But again, this just shows you some of the requirements for your prototype scene. All right, we're going to go on to model railroad engineer. And again, there's lots of requirements that you can read on your own on this. I don't want to specifically talk about every one. Some of them include, you must construct scratch-built scale models of 3 types of track. Now, very important, some of you people that have been through this program in the past, the rules changed for this in the last year or so. No longer do you need to acquire merit points for the quality of these scratch-built track components. It's pass-fail now. So what they look at, the judges will look at, is under construction, will a locomotive successfully traverse all routes on this scratch-built piece of track? Yes or no? What about conformity? Is it prototype practice? In other words, when you take the NMRA track standards gauge, are all the things in proportion to each other? Yes or no? And then scratch building. Did you scratch build the frogs and points, which are required? Commercial frogs are not allowed, and you're not allowed to use flex track. You have to lay your rail on ties. So either you did it, yes or no. Just an important point that I want to make with this. Here's 3 different submissions, which shows you, there's a list as long as your arm of the different track components that you can make. Here are 3 different ones. You can see at the top, there's a dual gauge turnout that was scratch built. You can see on the left bottom is a narrow gauge right-hand turnout. On the right side at the bottom, here is a crossover that goes from one track to another. Here's a very interesting one that my son actually built and submitted as one of his. Dual gauge track, but this particular thing takes the narrow gauge train from the left side of the tracks to the right side of the tracks because it's approaching a right-hand turnout. It escapes me what this is called, but again, it's on that long list of things that you can do for your track pieces. One important point, folks, fast tracks jigs, you're familiar with them. They may be used. They're a tool, just like a saw, just like any of those tools that you might use. So yes, you can use those fast tracks jigs. Let's get into model railroad engineer electrical. What you need to do in electrical is there's a bunch of things that you need to do. There's a whole checklist. The point I'm trying to make here is that when you submit it to your chair and then to me, some of you have the ability to do something this nice. You've got programs that you can put these things in, and you have the abilities in your computer to submit something like that. These are very well done and submitted by people in the Northeastern region. Some people out there, you might even recognize them. The point I want to make here, folks, is some of you don't have the skills, the CADs, the drawing skills or whatever to put together something like those first 2. Well, here's one that's perfectly acceptable. The person hand drew it with a ruler and a pencil and labeled everything. And as you go through the checklist of what's required, this has everything that is necessary. So it's perfectly fine. So don't let it scare you away that you don't think you might have the skills to do some of these things. Here's the track plan that's required. And again, somebody wrote it, did it by hand, and it's got all the different things. It's got the gaps written in. It has where the different blocks are. It has an engine terminal. It shows it. It's color coded where they show different things. So, folks, this is perfectly acceptable. Moving on to the chief dispatcher category. Folks, do you operate trains? Do you like to go to somebody's house and participate in formal operating sessions? Many of us do. There's a lot of them around the Northeastern region. And again, it does not have to be your railroad in order to do this, to submit it. If you operate at various railroads around the region and you keep track of them with the paperwork, you can accomplish the chief dispatcher. You can see on the left-hand side of the page there's somebody, Howard submitted this to me a while ago. It had all the different places he operated. As he went there, he took the paper with him, and he had the owner verify that he was there in the right-hand column. I've had other people that started operating years ago, but didn't do the paperwork. They were able to backtrack and contact the person. Yeah, remember on this day you operated, and they filled out the paperwork. But it's very easy to do that. It does not have to be one of the judges that verify it on the left-hand page. Just have to be able to verify that you were at somebody's railroad running trains. There are 5 different positions: engineer, hostler, those kinds of things. You need a certain number of hours in each one of those categories. You can look on the website to find out. When it's all done and you've got the total amount of hours, you submit it to your AP chair, and then 2 judges. Here you can see actually 3 judges validated this and then sent it off to me. There are some others: association official, association volunteer, model railroad author. I'm not going to get into each one of these too much individually, because actually I thought I was going to run out of time here, but I actually got about 5 or 7 minutes left. I guess I went through it a little quicker than I thought I would. I hope I didn't lose anybody along the way. But association official, if you are an elected official of your division, superintendent, president, vice president, treasurer, if it's an elected position, you get points for that. And after a certain number of points are accumulated, you can submit for the association official. Some of you might be on the regional board. Some of you might be hold elected office for the region. You get even more points for those. So if that's something you do, start documenting it. If it's not something you've done, something you might want to consider, because I can tell you that the division, the region, everybody's always looking for people to step forward in leadership positions if you really enjoy doing something like that. There's also a category called association volunteer. Lots of different ways that you can accumulate the necessary points in this. Have you opened your layout to your division for a visitation for a meeting? That's volunteering. Do you volunteer with your local Boy Scouts to teach model railroading? Do you have a position that you hold in your division that's not elected? Maybe you do the newsletter. It's not an elected position. Maybe you are the treasurer and it's not elected. Maybe you got on an ad hoc committee where they were trying to decide something, and you served for a few months on that committee. Well, those are all things that are volunteer for your association. You can document them, and then when you get enough points, submit for the volunteer award. There's also a category of model railroad author. You might be the newsletter person for your division. You might have written an article that gets in your division newsletter. You're not in charge of it, but you write a little article. Maybe you post some things online that are open to anyone, some how-to articles, things like that. There are a plethora of ways that you can get your author award as well. There are points counted for pages that you do, how many pages, how many words, that kind of thing. You can look through all of that, and it's just another one of the categories. And I want to make the point that you don't have to do any of these categories in any particular order. One doesn't have to be done before the other. Maybe you're an armchair modeler that you don't do a lot of modeling, but you might qualify in one of these 3 categories because you're really involved in your association. I'd say go for it. This is my last slide. So I want to just make that point again. You may have questions that I did not answer today. If you have questions, apchair@NMRA.org. Email me your questions before, I'd say, about 10 o'clock tonight. And then I'll put them together, and we will try to answer as many of those questions as we can tomorrow at 3:30. We have a very distinguished panel going to be with you guys tomorrow. There are 6 of us. 5 of the people are going to be MMRs. Some have been an MMR for years. some that have just recently accomplished being an MMR. We are also going to have Frank Koch with us in that roundtable. He is the National AP Chair, which really is the one that when I can't answer a question, he's the one I talk to because he's the bottom line. The buck stops with him. So again, 3:30 tomorrow, our MMR panel roundtable. We'll try to answer those questions, and I think we'll have a lot of fun doing it. That's all I got for you today, folks. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been informative.
Okay, Bill, let's see. You can stop sharing
my window, and then I'm going to go here. We should be back.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill, and I look forward to tomorrow's panel. And I think we'll just take the next 10 minutes to, we'll run some ads. But I did capture some questions that were out there in the chat, and I'll send you an email to that AP chair at NERnmra.org so you have them, because there were some good questions out there in the chat. So I'll forward those on to you, and hopefully they can get addressed tomorrow.
Thank you, Chuck, and I appreciate everybody. Hope I didn't put you to sleep.
No, I think everybody enjoyed it, and we'll see you again tomorrow at 3:30 in the afternoon.
All right, sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, don't forget, if you have questions for tomorrow's panel discussion on the NMRA Achievement Program, email them to apchair@nernmra.org. It is almost time for the first part of the NERx model showcase, but first, let's take a look at the CSX Northeast, a freelance layout representing both CSX and Conrail prior to the breakup of Conrail. The layout features a single track main line from Buffalo, New York to Cleveland, Ohio, both represented by staging. The CSX Northeast features several overhead freights moving heavy tonnage along with East and West Amtrak service. There are several large industrial switching areas served by both local and sweeper trains. A branch line to the second deck allows access to a large coal loading facility. Two short line railroads, the fictional S&N and the Central Ohio system, have interchange locations in addition to servicing their own customers. Now let's take a closer look at Dave Martini's CSX Northeast, followed by the NERx model showcase.
Hello everybody, my name is David Martini and welcome to the CSX Northeast Division. I wanted to give you a little bit of an intro to the layout. This layout is set in the mid-1990s. It's a fictional layout of the CSX Conrail merger, and it literally happened on this layout 2 years before the actual merger of the two layouts. We're actually standing at the west end of the layout. We actually have Buffalo staging behind the wall to my right and the Erie staging yard just in front of it. To give you a little more insight on this layout, it was actually built as a pair of layouts. When the concept started, this layout and my dad's were going to be joint layouts covering across New York State, starting at Albany to Buffalo on my dad's layout. Then this layout will go from Buffalo to Cleveland. And the entire intent was operations oriented. We typically had operating sessions 2 weeks apart. You could come on this layout, run trains from west to east, Cleveland to Buffalo. 2 weeks later, you would go over to Dad's and pick up the same train symbols going from Buffalo to Albany through Syracuse on his layout. And what Dad did is created an operating network of two railroads, same trains, so you could run a train from Albany to Cleveland or Cleveland to Albany. And we tried to set it up so the crew members had the same trains. So they would run from Cleveland to Buffalo staging on this layout. They would move to Dad's layout 2 weeks later and then run the same train, same power from Dad's Buffalo staging to Albany staging through his Syracuse division. Okay, right now we're looking at Erie Yard. This is the first stop coming out of Buffalo heading west. This is an interchange yard and a local working yard. There's an industrial district off to the right as we're going around. It's also the interchange point for the S&N Railroad. And I didn't mention this previously, but the S&N is a short line interchange, 100% fictional, basically called S&N. For those of you who have been here before, it's actually the initials for my two daughters. S&N became a perfect short line railroad. You can actually see the second deck in front of you right now, and that's the end point Looking at the SNN short line, the SNN interchanges with the CSX down in Erie Yard. A little bit later, we'll show you the helix and how to get down to the Erie interchange. Right now, you're looking at the industrial section. There's a little bit of switching up here, make up the outward interchange train, and heads down towards Ridgeway, and we're approaching the bridge which crosses over a small river and a highway. We are watching the SNN transfer heading down to Erie. It's actually crossing over the bridge we talked about a little bit earlier. And there's a neat story behind this bridge. One of the people who helped build this layout and model is a fantastic bridge builder. He came over one Saturday afternoon. We were putzing around for about an hour running trains. He went out to his car after about 2 hours, came in with this bridge, set it down in this location. About 10 minutes later, the saws and tools came out and we installed this bridge. It was a complete surprise, but a very nice surprise which turned into a very nice entry scene into the basement. Moved over to the west end of the layout. I'm standing in front of the town of Mentor. Mentor is nothing more than a big passing siding, and there is a short industrial spur down to the cement plant, which you see behind me. Just a small tidbit of information. The power on this layout is anywhere from 10 to 15 years old. Everything is digital, Digitrax. We're still in the process of upgrading to sound units. As time allows, each unit will be upgraded accordingly and move into the modern era with sound-equipped engines. And while we're looking here, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the recent upgrades to the railroad over the past year and a half. The first one is some fascia controls. These 4 toggle switches here control the turnouts in the back, which controls the passing siding. The other thing we have is a repeater panel for the signals. The signal system has been recently updated, and all the signals, you can see one in the background here, are in the proper orientation relative to the trains. The drawback is, from a human operator point of view in the aisles, you can't see the signals. So I place these repeater panels in the fascia so the human operator can see what the signals are indicating and operate accordingly. There was a report of a non-functional crossing gate in Mentor as we're leaving the train station. So the CSX maintenance crew has been called to work on the signal. The maintenance away worker is hidden inside the control box fixing the relays. We're standing in front of the town of Euclid. Euclid is the last town before Cleveland staging heading west. This is an interchange point where we head up to Cleveland. So there is a junction behind me to my right which branches off, and this train you see in the foreground will be heading up to Columbus. We're standing in front of the Cleveland station, which is about 10 real miles west of Euclid. The next stop after this is the Cleveland staging yard. The CSX main line runs in front. The back track underneath the Ohio Co-op building is the branch line heading up to Columbus. Okay, we're in front of my workbench / CTC dispatcher panel. Up on the screen we have the JMRI program, which runs the signals on the railroad. The red highlighted sections are where trains are occupied at this moment. Got typical dispatcher's desk, got extra batteries. Got one unique thing to take a look at is this ground cyan red pepper. We have a cat problem here in this household, and the red pepper, just open the bottle, sit it where the cat tends to hide and hang out, and will distract it. It's been very successful over the last month. This is the last section of the modeled railroad. This is the branch line heading up to Columbus. Columbus is to my left. Another small tidbit on this layout, the bridge behind me was built by the same person that built the bridge you saw earlier on the SNN Railway. John is an excellent bridge builder. He keeps finding ways to add bridges to this layout, which is a nice benefit of having a large modeling crew that comes and helps me out quite a bit on this layout. We're currently standing in the Fairport Harbor area of the layout. This is an industrial branch line which branches off the helix behind the wall to my left. It's a switching area. It is actually operated with least power from Finger Lakes. This is partly due to the joint layout concept we talked earlier. My dad's layout actually modeled the Finger Lakes Railroad, Solvay to Geneva. And since that layout is no longer being operated, we had the Finger Lakes power, which is now being leased to CSX to run the Fairport Harbor branch line here around you. The layout has 3 main staging yards. To my right is the far most western staging yard, Cleveland. The east end has Buffalo, again, which is staging. The Fairport Harbor scene also has a 3-track Norfolk Southern staging yard for additional interchange traffic.
program to check out part 1 of the NERx Model Showcase. The next 4 photos show the 2 new HO-scale big city modules for the Central New York Modelers Club in Syracuse, New York, thanks to Bill Brown, a master model railroader from the Central New York Division. Bill has always been fascinated with street running of trains. Microscale H.J. Zane Mercantile and American Model Builders Creamery kits combine to make an impressive scene. A fine-scale miniatures Western Auto kit makes a nice foreground scene. Bill also provided a photo of how he hid a Keep Alive in plain sight when there is no room in the locomotive. This 3-rail Lionel O-gauge layout built by David McLeod is really 4 levels of layouts, each depicting a different theme, starting with this 58-year-old Lionel Scout train from his youth. This level of the layout depicts the Lehigh Valley hauling coal from Pennsylvania to New York. One of the 2 middle levels represents Boston and Maine hauling supplies to a shipyard. Joe Cavanaugh, one of the NER's newest master model railroaders, is from the Hudson Berkshire Division and scratch-built the Lamoille Pickle Factory in 1/12 scale for his outdoor railroad. The frame of the structure is made of 1/2-inch square steel tube, welded or silver brazed, depending on the location of the joint. The wood pieces were ripped to size from pine boards. The platform deck is 6 inches above the base, shown incomplete here. The vats are just over 8 inches in diameter and 8 inches high. The model is 4 feet long and 2 feet wide and will be moved to its permanent location when the weather turns warmer. Joe also purchased this 1-inch or 1/12 scale incomplete locomotive kit. He only used the chassis and running gear for the locomotive. Here you see one completed side and end of the locomotive. The rivets in the corners are functional while the rest are not. Here is the model nearing completion. The battery-operated locomotive will have the option to be controlled by tether or wireless. Joe and Ken Nelson have teamed up to build this 1.5-inch or 1/8 scale interlocking tower for the Adirondack Live Steamers Club in Saratoga Springs, New York. Joe is building the structure while Ken is building the detailed interior. The coal bunker for the Fairbanks Scale Company's boiler house were the basis for an HO model by Larry Cannon, a master model railroader from the Seacoast Division. Finding little clue as to how the bin was raised to the up position, Larry found vintage photographs of garbage trucks that used a similar cable and pulley system shown in the prototype photo. Larry imagineered his model using Tichy sheaves and pillow blocks. Here are a couple photos from Malcolm Houck, a Hub Division member of scratch-built NYO&W double cabs constructed in brass. The first is a Class J 260. Malcolm's second locomotive is a Class S 280 short boiler. That's it for part 1 of the NERx Model Showcase. Stay tuned for part 2 in this evening's NERx program. Well, thank you, Dave, for a fantastic tour of your layout. Our next clinician joined the NMRA at the 2009 Hartford National Convention, where he gave a clinic. He's an active chassis system modeler, building the B&O line from Brunswick, Maryland to Cumberland, Maryland in HO scale. He's completed 4 achievement certificates and is working on others. His work can be seen on his extensive website, www.trainweb.org/Chessie. He is also the superintendent of the Nutmeg Division. With our focus on trains, many of us forget the important part vehicles play in our layout scenes. This is where our next clinician can help. Let's welcome Jeff Hankey.
Thanks, Chuck. Good afternoon, everybody. As I was introduced, Jeff Hankey from the Nutmeg Division. Today we're going to cover modeling vehicles. Everything you're going to see on this clinic is really centered around my area of 1982, but I think it's applicable to anybody for any era, even if you're modeling internationally. These sort of tidbits and stuff will help you as you go through modeling vehicles. So we're going to start with covering basically a definition of what a vehicle is. Go through a number of slides to discuss, as you look at vehicles, what sort of types of vehicles and what sort of age of the vehicles you should be focusing on. We'll talk about standards for your vehicle models. We'll talk about some of the models that are available out in the commercial marketplace today, specific brands and specific types. And then I'll share some of the tips that I find out as we continue to make models, which ones are good and can make your models even better. So first off, just a quick slide on a definition. What is a vehicle? For my purposes, it's any machine that moves over the ground that doesn't permanently ride the rails. So that middle picture, you see the Volkswagen Beetle. That's what most people think of as a vehicle, but also vehicles are such things as construction equipment, as you see on the bottom left, and on the right, high rail equipment, normal street running trucks that can, if they needed, ride on the rails. Okay, so one of the things that as you start to model vehicles across whatever layout you are building, you're going to find out it's pretty hard to find hard data as to what the entire fleet of vehicles across America looks like. I did find some data on some Department of Transportation websites that basically estimated around 1982, you can see about 40% of the vehicles on the road were cars, about another 30% were trucks, and then the remainder was made up almost equally between vans and semi-trucks. So hard to find data, but just as you want to think about total of your fleet across your layout, what sort of vehicles should be populating it, try to keep this ratio in your head as you continue to build. So another thing about the types of vehicles you pick, the types of vehicles you pick vary with the era. If you're modeling, the turn of the century, there's very few vehicle types, but as you get towards modern era, certain types of vehicles are invented, and then certain type of vehicles die out as well. So for 1982, for me, if you look in this picture of the World Series, it's a pretty good example. If you look out there, some of the vehicle types that aren't too popular today, El Caminos, station wagons, hatchbacks, really quite popular in photos of the era. Camper tops on the back of pickup trucks were very popular. Conversion vans were incredibly popular. There's a whole bunch of RVs in this picture, but that is due to the fact that it's a World Series event and people were there to spend the night. There's also, if you notice something about this picture, if you look at it across all of these hundreds of cars, there are very few sports cars, and there are very few foreign cars. I actually see a couple of classics in there. I see of a car that would be about from the 1950s. So take away a lot from looking at pictures like this. But for my era, in 1982, you can see the sort of things in the photo that I talked about above. So I love parking lot photos. I think if you're going to model vehicles on your layout, the area that you model in the country and the time that you model in the country, search out those business photos that have large parking lots. And you'll get a good, diverse collection of automobiles in those photos. This is a great photo. I believe it's a Kmart parking lot in around 1982. And look at the number of two-tone vehicles. We just don't do that much anymore in the United States, but they were very popular in 1982. Look at the vinyl tops on cars, also not seen very often. And those of us who grew up in this era, you're continually mocked by the fact that vehicles had the artificial wood siding back then, but that was a popular addition on the trim of vehicles. Another thing is you look for photos to make up what you're going to build and try to decide what you're going to build in your own layout, don't neglect the overhead shots like this. This is a shot of the West Meriden Mall in Connecticut in 1994. The reason I put this picture up here is to let you know the overhead shots will let you know good composition or ratios of the colors that your cars are. There's only one yellow car in this entire picture. You can see a lot more white and silver cars and blue and black cars than you probably thought were on the road. Vinyl tops are basically gone by 1994. None of these cars have it. Also, as you're starting to model and want to know where to put your vehicles, realize that most people put their, when they have a choice to park, they park closest to the building possible, and the open spots are far away from the building. Also note the FedEx truck in this picture. Most deliveries are done right next to the building. They don't park in a normal spot and then deliver their stuff. So a lot of information can be gleaned as you start to wonder what you're going to model by looking at pictures of parking lots. So here's a good picture that I like to use as an example of not only what's in the picture, but what's not in the picture. I told you that some types of vehicles start and then they die out. Well, as of 1982, the year I model, there were no minivans. First minivan came out in 1984, the Dodge Caravan. You're not going to see any of those there. The prevalence of SUVs on the road today, you're not going to see as well. You don't see any Honda CR-Vs or Nissan Rogues in these pictures. There's definitely no hybrid or electric, so don't look for your Tesla or Prius out there. No massively huge four-wheel drive Hummer type cars in here either, and definitely no exotics. So all of those things should be thought about as you continue to go out and model vehicles on your layout, that they fit the era and they fit the location you're modeling. So let's talk about ownership. So vehicles on the road are really owned by 4 different categories. So the biggest of which is private ownership, people who own cars like me and you, and we drive to work every day in them, and it's a private vehicle. But one category we all like is model railroaders, is railroad-owned vehicles. And I'll tell you, as a ratio, we typically overrepresent railroad-owned vehicles on our layouts. We love them because they've got the logo of our favorite road, and we continue to want to put them on. But we probably overrepresent, in general, the number of railroad vehicles we have. Underrepresented, though, are the commercial and the municipal vehicles. And those are ones that are owned by companies or ones that are owned by towns or cities or states. Those sort of vehicles are generally more difficult to model and generally not as easily available in the commercial marketplace, and underrepresented on model railroads of vehicles. So probably one of the things you don't think about when you model, and like, for example, in my case, I model 1982. That doesn't mean go out and buy all 1982 vehicles. In 1982, the average age of a vehicle on the road was 7.2 years old. That has grown every year. Today, it's 11.5 years old. So what that means is for 1982, the average vehicle on the road is a 1975 model year. So keep that in mind as you continue to acquire models for your era. Just because you model 1982 doesn't mean it's a fleet of 1982 brand new cars. So why are vehicles important? I think vehicles, most of us who are model railroad folks go and look at a layout and we notice the trains. You see the trains, you appreciate the trains. Most people who aren't model railroaders, who go to your layout, probably one of the first things they recognize are the cars, the vehicles. And those vehicles allow them to date and place your layout in the world and in time. So I'll show 2 examples here. On the left is a photo from my layout. And if you see the vehicles, they're very 1982 focused. You would find all of those on the road in 1982. The Pacer, the old VW Bug, the hatchback Escort, the van. Those are typical vehicles of the era. On the right is a photo I took at the Big E. And frankly, it's kind of the mistake you see a lot of people do when they model vehicles. So you have here a 1950 era police car tailing a brand new modern tow truck that's towing it like a 1960s Volvo with a European modeled ambulance next to it. Those 4 cars, those 4 vehicles really don't fit together. And it makes for a little bit of a confusion of someone who's trying to look at your layout and understand what you're trying to accomplish with your model. So let's talk about some of the specific types. Commercial vehicles. One of the commercial vehicles, specifically in 1982, that is really, really ubiquitous and found all over is the telephone van. But however, they're not offered. Trident offers a plain van, and I made custom decals for what you see here for the CMP Telephone Company, and all the versions of the bells, Northwest Bell, Southern Bell, Southwest Bell, these are seen all over the place. And it's one of those vehicles that if you're going to have a late 70s, early 80s layout, you really need to model some of these. Another thing with commercial vehicles is make sure they're positioned appropriately in a scene. So I talked about that FedEx truck in the Meriden Mall picture earlier on. This is a parking lot at my passenger station in Martinsburg, West Virginia on the bottom. If you look to the left, the electrical truck, the post office delivery vehicle, and the telephone truck are all close to the building on the left. And the passengers' cars, all the normal privately owned cars are in the normal passenger spots by the yellow guardrail. So that's kind of a typical placement. Also, probably want to leave some empty spaces. I didn't do that in my photo very well. I packed them in there, but you should leave some cars in empty spaces. Up on the top in the other inset picture, the A&E alignment shop is a car dealership. Obviously, if you're going to have to work on a transmission on your car, you're probably driving that yellow Pacer. So putting it behind the tow truck delivered to the company business there is an appropriate representation and placement in your layout. Municipal vehicles. Municipal vehicles are very common, but unfortunately, because they're usually uniquely decorated for each area, they're not usually modeled very well or modeled very much at all. Police vehicles, fire vehicles, school buses, ambulance, even street sweepers, meter maids, and road maintenance vehicles are all the sort of vehicles that are common that you should spend some time to model. That's a Lindbergh school bus model. It's a rather old kit, but it's a good for the 1970s era school buses. So that's why I have that one in the picture. So if you're going to model a municipal scene, I can tell you, I think typically people like to overdo it. So something I would suggest is if you're going to model a fire scene, as in that model in the bottom right hand, probably want to make it a little more understated than that to make it a little more believable. A lot of people put way too much equipment in their scenes of municipal stuff. And frankly, I wish more people made ambulance models, but to find an ambulance model is very, very rare. Construction. So don't neglect construction equipment and construction vehicles on your layout. They make for some very good scenes. The one on the bottom left there is incredibly good of a single construction site with a backhoe, putting in a piece of pipe. Makes for a very believable scene and a great model. Much harder to pull off is the larger construction site on the right. Done a good job there putting that in, but lots and lots of equipment needed, lots of specialized equipment in construction sites. So you have to be careful as you choose it, that you choose the appropriate piece of gear for the job that you're trying to depict. Also, these don't tend to change much over time, so it's usually pretty difficult to place it in what era the construction equipment is, which is good for most of us because one piece of equipment can be used for many more modelers. Military vehicles. So military vehicles of all eras are available. World War II vehicles all the way up to modern vehicles. If you want to model military stuff, Roco is the biggest brand in the market for doing that. All those orange boxes you see there are Roco models. Military vehicles do move on the railroad, as you see by that DODX flat car and a couple of Abrams tanks on it. But they can also be seen on normal streets. One thing I'd hesitate for modelers who are modeling vehicles of military variety, the very, very big equipment is usually too heavy to actually just ride on the regular roads. So, you're not going to see a main battle tank going down your city street. So it's usually the things like a Jeep or a Humvee more recently. Those sort of vehicles are seen on the roads, or 6x truck, not your armored personnel carriers and your main battle tanks. Aircraft. Aircraft is a type of vehicle as well. There are limited offerings out in the marketplace to do vehicle models of airports. They're not done much for a reason. They take up an incredible amount of space. So the Big, huge layout in Germany is that picture on the bottom left. You know, you need that much space if you're going to really pull off what an airport looks like. So most of us really shy away from airports due to the space constraints in our private homes. So let's talk about how you model some of the railroad type vehicles for a minute. So probably one of the more common ones, especially in my era in the early 80s, is the utility stake bed truck. That's a real picture in the upper right in Hancock, West Virginia. And Trident does offer a good model for one, and that's mine in the bottom left. So a pretty typical, you know, around the railroad kind of vehicle, good to post next to freight station or, you know, next to the actual right of way for a detail. Smaller than the stake bed truck is the utility pickup truck. Again, very common, used a lot for maintenance of way horses all over the railroad. That utility box in the back can, you know, store all their tools and everything they need, welders, etc. So it's a good vehicle to have on a railroad. And Trident does make a very good kit. That's a Trident one there in my model. It's a real one in the upper right-hand corner. So to speak a minute about trailers, this is also another, I think, a common mistake in modeling vehicles. A railroad marked trailer is really rarely seen on a private road. They're seen on the railroad. They're transported by the railroad. They're seen at the intermodal facilities, loading and unloading, but really not seen much on your local small city street that a lot of us model. So keep that in mind as you go. All of us love, you know, showing off our logo of our favorite railroad on everywhere we can, but really, for example, this chassis system trailer that you see in the reel in the picture on the top, you're really not going to come across that very often on a regular road. Also, not all railroad vehicles have railroad logos. So some of these vehicles have been repurposed or bought secondhand. Upper right-hand corner is Martinsburg, West Virginia on my layout. That's a real picture of the crew bus. It was an old school bus that they painted blue on the bottom, white on the top, and that was basically it. So to model that, I took a Lindbergh kit. It's the exact same kit as the regular school bus you saw earlier, the yellow one. And I cut it down and made it a short bus so that it looked like the one that you see in the picture in the upper right. But again, no logos, but it is a railroad vehicle. So let's talk a little bit about the standards of models for modeling vehicles. First off, dull coat is your friend. I use Tester's dull coat in the spray can all the time. I use the micro scale micro mask, which is a bluish kind of liquid to apply a mask on the glass. The convertibles there only have a front windshield, but you know, usually all the way around, including the side and the back glass of a normal sedan or type vehicle. And if you look at the difference, these are both Camaros. That blue one has not been dull coated and the silver one has. It may seem counterintuitive to put a dull coat on a paint job of a car that is normally glossy, but it actually looks much, much better in a model. It doesn't look nearly as toyish. So I apply the micro mask with a brush, and then I spray it with Tester's dull coat, and it looks very good. Also, I try to make sure I have period correct colors. So in 1982, we talked about using some of those parking lot photos to determine the colors. I try to make sure we have rear view mirrors on my vehicles as well. The two Camaros is a good example of back in the late 60s. You didn't need to have two rear view mirrors. One on a passenger side was not needed. So a driver's side rear view mirror is only seen in those two models. License plates is a great one. Microscale makes license plates for 1970s and later vehicles. MC4149 is the actual sheet. And those are from all sorts of states, and you clip them off and you put them on the back. Just a word of warning, you can see the ones down there in the bottom picture, all the ones with the license plate decals. Obviously, if you're doing vehicles on a train, like on an auto rack, those have not been registered, so you don't need license plates on all those cars. Minimal weathering. I think people tend to overdo vehicle weathering. That they don't really get, unless you're out there mud bogging or going off-roading, your car doesn't really get that dirty. I do put a dark wash on the wheels to accent the details on the wheels, and that way they look more realistic. Another thing to consider is to put a driver in about 10% of your cars. Just think about how long you have a car and how much you're actually in it. You're not in it as much as you think. So not every vehicle needs somebody in it. It is nice to have people in them if they're actually positioned on the road, but most vehicles are actually empty. So let's talk about the models that are available in the market. So if you're a 1980s modeler like myself, Trident is your friend. Trident is about $15 a piece. These are plastic cars, so you'll see that the material that the vehicle is made out of varies over time, but these are made out of plastic. They're very excellent Chevrolet and GMC models. They're 1980s era. They also have a complete state police line. That upper left-hand picture is a Maryland State Police Blazer. They make tow trucks. The bottom right-hand one's a tow truck. They do make pickups. I don't have any pickups in those pictures, but even the logos they choose, like that Federal Express logo in the upper right-hand part of the picture, is a great 1980s era appropriate logo. One of the things I also like best about Trident is since they are plastic, they have a plastic top and a plastic bottom, you can pry them apart and therefore position a driver in the seat very easily. Another brand that's really good is the Viking models, or Viking, some people say, although I think it's Viking. They make great Beetles, and the Beetle was one of the highest selling cars in America in my era, and they are the only one that I know that makes the Beetle convertible. And the last several years of Beetle production were only convertibles. So if you're going to model Beetles in your layout, they're not all hard tops, and they make the convertible one. They also make many other European models, but like we said, the European cars were not very prevalent in the 80s. They may be more prevalent today if you model a more modern era. Busch makes a whole bunch of great cars if you're modeling. They're about $10 a piece. You can find them very easily on train shows or eBay. I really like their Dodge Monaco. Finding more typical cars are the things that really give your layout a feel of the era. So a Dodge Monaco is a very typical four-door sedan of the era, late 70s type thing. And like we said, 1975 is the average age for my layout that's in 1982. So finding a mid to late 70s sedan is excellent. They also make a Firebird. You see the light blue Firebird down there at the bottom left in the picture. So that's a good car for the occasional, little more muscle car. And again, I model northern West Virginia, so having a 5, 6, 7-year-old muscle car would not be unheard of as well. If you're a European model maker or have a set your layouts based in Europe, they have an unbelievable supply of European brands as well. Herpa makes an excellent Grand National. Buick as well. They make a Buick version, basically the same car. They make Golfs and Rabbits. You can see the Golf down there on the bottom in the red. They're very good cars, very similar to the Busch models as well, and reasonably priced at $10, and they're plastic. So here's, I really believe these all must be made in the same factory because they come in virtually the same box, and they're virtually the same detail level, and they're virtually the same price. But Fresh Cherries, Motormax, Malibu International, and Model Power, they all come in these little boxes like this. These are incredibly good vehicles to buy for your home layout. They're die-cast cars, so the actual shell of the car is metal. It's not plastic. They're riveted between the top and the bottom, so it's really hard to get it out to separate it to put a driver in. But they are excellent for very common types of cars in the early 70s to the early 80s. As a matter of fact, if anybody remembers when the Fresh Cherries line came out, it actually came out through Walmart, and they sold for about $2 a piece. They were so popular, people were just buying them by the box, and that's what I did. They come in all sorts of models, not only in the Ford Escort you see in the bottom left there, or the AMC Hornet. They come in all sorts of Ford Escort, you name it, they come in all sorts of varieties. If you want to pay a little more, so the polar opposite of a cheap Fresh Cherries car is a Neo diecast car, but these are unbelievably detailed models. So that's a Buick LeSabre on the top. That's a Cadillac on the bottom, Coupe de Ville. They have incredible trim on them. They have incredible vinyl roofs. Amazing. They even have I think a Jeep Grand Cherokee with wood siding on it. So just great, great models. They are, however, difficult to find. So you have to continue to look on eBay to find them, and they'll cost you about $25 a piece. Some of the big model collection manufacturers, they also make vehicles. Athearn, for example, and Atlas have both made semi-trucks. They make very good 1970s and era schemes. Those the striped ones you see there on Athearn are very popular. They also offer a 1973 Ford pickup truck. And I'll come to a slide later about it, but if you have a Ford Fairmont, I want to buy it, and you'll see why in a minute. Atlas made a Ford Fairmont several years ago that's unbelievably valuable. Roco, we talked about Roco for all the military models they made earlier. Roco makes also some great Jeeps in civilian versions. The Golden Eagle and the Laredo you see on the right, they do obviously make the military version on the bottom left. So these are great types of vehicles. A Jeep is a different type of vehicle that when people see it, they can really quickly associate with the era you're in. And those, typical 1970s, early 80s Golden Eagle model is a great one to have on your layout. There are some miscellaneous kits out there as well, some really small companies that make vehicles. Lone Star makes a great series of flatbed trailers. Flatbed trailers, kind of a neglected type of vehicle, but if you find these Lone Star ones, they're great kits. They're really detailed. They come with a bulkhead in the front or not. They're great. Williams on the right there makes an El Camino, a great kit if you'd like. It actually comes in clear plastic to be painted, so it's a great one as well. There's a myriad of other little vehicle companies as they continue to make them. So be on the lookout there. If you have a specific type of car or truck or van that you're looking for, chances are you could just Google search for it with HO scale next to it, and someone has made one at one time. So other than buying commercially available kits, there's a couple of plastic or metal kits. There's a couple other materials. So resin, I think resin's kind of dying out. I don't think folks use resin as much as they used to. They're pretty rough when you get them. They require a lot of work before you can assemble it, getting rid of the flash and the panel lines and the mold lines, that sort of thing, before you can do it. They usually come with solid windows, which is why I generally shy away from resin kits. They're not hollow. The cab is one piece of solid material, for example, in this truck. So you can't see through it. So it looks kind of fake. It's okay if you want tinted windows and you just paint it black, it'd be okay. But, the windshield's normally not tinted. And then usually they don't roll. So usually they don't have an axle, so they just sit there. If you wanted to, have a vehicle that rolls, probably not going to be a resin kit. We had a sponsor here with Mini Prints who's doing a lot of the work you see in 3D printing. So, they're sponsoring the NERx, which is great. There's other folks out there as well doing all sorts of work to provide vehicles for us that are really one-off and unique kind of vehicles. I highlight the back, the maintenance away back of a truck there in that first picture. You can just buy that special detail part and put it on like a Trident truck, and you have an instant maintenance away specific craned vehicle with incredible detail. And in the bottom right-hand corner is a Jeep that somebody 3D printed. And the difference between a 3D print and a resin is, as you can see, the 3D print actually you can see through. So as you print it, it's not solid, it's hollow. So let's talk about some of the tips. As I build my vehicles, I tend to build my vehicles in batches. I don't like making one at a time. I generally make 3, 4, 5 cars at a time. I make sure I don't put any license plates on the open auto racks. I usually have a few drivers in their cars in the parking lot, but not many. Most cars in a parking lot are empty. Like to put a few people walking around or leaning on their cars. That's good to have too for making a more accurate model with a vehicle. Also, make sure when you think about your area, right, think about the sort of cars that would be there. In rural West Virginia, the domestic makes dominated how many were on the road for a long, long time. It really wasn't until the last 15 years, 20 years maybe, that the domestic makes had a real challenge with the foreign models. Also know your colors. Anybody's a Mopar fan out there knows their high impact line of purples and yellows and that sort of thing. You know, those are period correct for the late 60s, early 70s. Those sort of colors aren't seen too much after that. White is a lot more common than you think. White's kind of plain. People, if you're going to choose to buy a car, tend to pick more high impact colors than something plain like white, but white should be on your model. Another thing is a lot of these models that come out, the bumpers are a chrome color. It really doesn't look very natural to have the chrome on there. I would suggest painting the bumpers either a flat aluminum color or a gray color. It makes a bumper that was supposed to be chrome actually look better as a model, as opposed to the chrome color that comes with the kit. Okay, I would recommend to folks another tip is to try to model the average. Don't try to model the unique. And here's two examples in this photo. In the bottom left is another picture I took at the Big E. You have a policeman pulling over a Plymouth Superbird. Plymouth Superbird was a one-year only production car. They only made 2,100 of them with that big wing on the back. And people generally don't drive them on the road. By contrast, if you look in the bottom right-hand picture, that Honda Accord that's nearest to the camera, in 1982 alone, they made 195,000 of them. So it's much more likely you're going to see a Honda Accord on the road than you're ever going to see that Plymouth Superbird. But again, people tend to like to pick flashy things. If you're trying to do vehicle modeling and you're trying to make it feel like the era that you're trying to model, please do more of the average and less of the unique. There are good places to put models. I know a lot of people like vehicle models that are, you know, showcase type of models, and they want to get that Boss 429 Mustang that they had when they were a kid and put a model of that on the railroad. Good places for that are like a sports car, you know, maybe a car dealership or a car show model where you can put those things together and it makes sense that all those nice cars are in one location at one time. Further, one of the things, most of our vehicles, pickup trucks, for example, utility trucks, they have open backs. Use those as an opportunity to make your vehicle models more interesting. In the bottom left there is a Trident pickup truck that I added a plastic wheelbarrow to and some sawdust. So it looks like wood chips. The guy's just hauling some wood chips. He's got the wheelbarrow in there, and the utility truck in the upper the right-hand side there has a ladder. If you look carefully, you can see there's a cone and a shovel in there, and there's also a couple reels of wire, sort of things you'd see in the back of a truck by the phone company. So make sure you use those areas if you have them to showcase what that vehicle would be doing on the road anyway. I actually bought this as is, and I just wanted to use it as an example to show you if you don't use the micro mask or a piece of tape to mask the windows, what happens if you dull coat it. So this was this way when I got it. It's unfortunate. It fogs the windows up. So it makes for a really awkward looking model when it's this dirty. You may want to do this if you were modeling a abandoned car. It would work well to do that. Just paint right over the windows with dull coat. But for one on the street, the windows you'll be able to see through. So make sure you mask them first. Here's another tip most people don't think about, but in my era, and specifically in the early 80s and late 70s, over-the-road trucks had more than one license plate. They were required to get license plates from multiple states that they drove through. And if you see here, the one on the left has 2 license plates on the front, and the trailer on the right has 3 on the front. Eventually, they went to this sticker kind of mentality, if you see in the upper right-hand corner. But that's a nice detail to show people that you understand the modeling of your vehicles in your era. And the last piece of advice I'll have is if somebody releases a vehicle model, buy it. Don't wait. So the Atlas 1978 Ford Fairmont came out, it's probably 10 years ago at this point. And if you look on the bottom left on eBay, with the shipping, somebody paid over $80 for one 1978 Ford Fairmont HO scale vehicle. And if you think that was an anomaly from 2018, which is when I took that picture. The two on the right are ones that I took last week, where someone is trying to sell a wagon for $44 and a sedan for $42. So truly amazing how some vehicles get snatched up as soon as they're released, and people are willing to pay crazy prices to actually get a model of that car. So if you see one, get it. If you have a Ford Fairmont, you want to sell me for less than, I don't know, $15, give me a call. I'll be happy to buy it. And I'm surprised, just like I said, that the no manufacturer has made a telephone truck. No manufacturer has made a mail Jeep either. I think there's a great opportunity there. Anybody, if Atlas or Athearn wants to make a vehicle of a, standard mail Jeep, they were used for decades and decades. They were seen all over America all the time on the roads. If you think about it, this is the municipal vehicle or federal vehicle in this case that is on the road every day, all the time. So if you find one, please do it. The only one I've ever found is a Shapeways printed one, but it'd be a good model for someone to make. And that's it for my clinic. I would say this is also one of my favorite pictures of a vehicle, as it's a Western Maryland chassis system, high-railed four-door sedan. So pretty interesting vehicle, but happy to take any questions.
All right, Jeff, some great tips, some great models, and we did get some great questions.
Okay.
So the first question was, does anyone make a close to scale rooftop beacon?
For like a police car or something?
I would assume so, yes.
No, really, most of them are oversized. The Bush ones are very oversized. There really isn't a good one. The closest you can get is kind of the bubblegum machine, the old circular one in the middle, because those are larger generally than the light bar types that they use today. But no, there's really nothing great on the market. It would be an LED would be the best way to do it, but I can't speak to one right off the top of my head.
Okay. The second question was, did pickups have better payloads back then, or did people just terribly overload them with bed campers?
No, actually, they're basically, half-ton, three-quarter-ton, one-ton pickup trucks back then as they are today. The camper thing that you put in it, the one where people would put on the back of a pickup truck, a camper, it's really not that heavy.
Yeah.
So it doesn't add that much weight.
Yeah, I remember those, and you don't see them anymore. It's all trailers.
No, but that's
RVs.
a great era specific detail that would be good for someone to model.
Yep.
They're probably available in Shapeways, I would imagine.
Yeah, probably. Are these? Well, I think you've kind of, if people were paying attention, you did notice that they were HO scale models that you were talking about. But the question was, are these cars in scale 1/87th, or are you using 1/64th as a viable option as period correct?
That's a great question. No, I never use 1/64th. 1/64th is the Hot Wheel scale or the Matchbox car scale. They are significantly larger when you set it next to an 87th scale vehicle. And in particular, 64th, the tires tend to be overscaled too on those sort of cars. So make sure you buy 1/87th.
Okay. Somebody asked if you had a good reference or a good source for parking lot photos.
No, I would suggest you Google is probably the best place to start. Your area and your location. In particular, if you have a business or an industry that's near that you're trying to model, look in those photos. As a matter of fact, I use it quite a bit for finding, you'll see those cars around a railroad picture that you're looking at. That's a great way to do it. And then maybe there's a local business that in your area from that time. Search that brand name. Search for that store like Kmart, for example, and you'll find pictures from the outside almost always of a Kmart.
Yep. Okay. What brands do you suggest for late 50s era modeling?
I actually think, so if you're doing late 50s, you're looking for, model probably from like 1947 to 52 or 3, that kind of year models of car. They're much more popular because those are the cars that are steam to diesel transition era, which is the most popular era. Even Woodland Scenics just came out with cars that are lit that are those era. But most of the folks that you look out there, it'll be a lot easier to find 50s era cars than it is to find 1980s era cars.
Okay. Okay. Does anyone other than Faller make motorized chassis to go under these cars so they can work on the Faller road system?
No, not that I know of. Everybody I know who's gotten a Faller system up and running has basically hacked. You know, if you take like a Trident car or something, you just morph it right onto their bottom to make a different vehicle.
Okay. Okay. Have you tried? You mentioned resin cars, and you didn't mention Sylvan by brand. Have you ever tried building any Sylvan resin cars vehicles?
No, I don't think I have. I'm not sure if they make 1970s or 80s era vehicles. So I'd have to check, but no, I haven't made one.
Yeah, I try to remember now that you mentioned it. I'm not trying to remember if they make any 80s era cars either, so they might not. Are there any reasonably priced public buses? I saw you at the Lindbergh, and that actually brought back some memories for me on buses. But how about public buses?
Yeah, that's good. There are some. I'm trying to remember the brand name. They make a Greyhound bus that is I'll call it the 60s era kind of version of a Greyhound bus.
Okay.
I don't have any of them modeled, but there are buses available for sure.
Okay. Are there any modeling groups for vehicles, just as there's groups for railroads and structure building and things like that? Are there groups that you would recommend?
There are. There's actually a 187 vehicles group on a website. They have a lot of great examples and a lot of very talented vehicle modelers out there who are modeling things. And I believe it's 1/87vehicles.org, I think.
Okay. Okay. And you've assembled some models. I know a lot of the models you showed there didn't require assembly, but you have assembled some. And one of the things that I've always frustrated me is making sure that all four wheels are touching the ground. Do you have any tips on making sure all four wheels are touching the ground?
Yeah, usually that happens because the plastic is warped or twisted, or you've somehow got the axle and the two things cattywampus. I usually try to, if it's a metal axle between the two wheels, you can bend the metal axle a little bit to accommodate that. You can also, if it's the worst case scenario, you can actually sand the high wheel a little bit, make a little bit of a flat spot, and get the other ones down. But yes, that does happen on occasion.
Okay. Okay.
Or you can also cheat and find a place where the ground's not level and that car sits and all four tires touch.
Okay. Okay. Now you mentioned the ambulance and you mentioned the mail Jeep. Is there any specific vehicle that you're looking for or that you wish was manufactured, or are those the ones that you wish are manufactured for your layout?
Yeah, I mean the mail Jeep has to be like the most common vehicle that's not modeled today. I also, when you say an ambulance or a fire truck, those are pretty era specific and location specific. So I wish there was an easier way to model those ones to match your actual local area, but those are real hard projects to do. You have to basically custom make decals. But really, other than the mail Jeep, I can't think of one that I just am dying for somebody to make.
Okay. All right. Well, there's one last question I see that came in on Facebook. How do you tell what cab unit fits a given era? I model pre-55 era.
Some manufacturers are really good. Like Atlas, for example, they'll tell you the model year that the car is. So it's a 1973 Ford F-150 pickup truck or whatever it is. But then sometimes what I actually have to do is go guess when I look at it, basically on the shape. I'll go hit a normal vehicle website and put, 1955 Ford on it and see what that looks like and see if it's correct. And if not, I'll go check 1960 Ford or 1965 Ford. And you can kind of understand how the body styles change over time by doing your research on Google like that. You can see cars very quickly of all different sizes and shapes.
Okay. Well, I think that was all the questions I saw, and that really wraps up this afternoon's program. And at this point, we're going to be killing the stream. So a new stream will start about 10 minutes before 7 o'clock Eastern time. And remember to begin refreshing your browser window until you see the new live feed. In the meantime, now might be a good time to enter in the mini prints drawing, and we'll see you at 7. Thank you.